Are you ready?
Indeed, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, just one procedural aspect before we return to Mr. Ngwenia's evidence, if I may.
Yes.
Our second planned witness for today is Mr. Perry. We've engaged with him about the possibility of tomorrow,
Yes.
which he can conveniently make.
Yes.
It's my estimation that he won't start today, that the idea would
Okay.
be to complete Mr. Ngwenia's evidence. And in the
Yes.
light of that, we request that he be excused to
Yes.
return tomorrow.
No, that's fine. He's excused. He can return tomorrow.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes. And he returns tomorrow at 8.
At 8 o'clock, that's
Yeah.
the arrangement.
Okay,
Thank you. Mr. Ngwenya, we were just about to turn to page 7 of your affidavit before the lunch break. So I'd like us to start there if we may. This is where you start to detail the audio recordings and documents that you were provided with by Ms. Tlatsana. Can you take us through what you were handed by her on that day that you met over the weekend in June? Oh, Mr. Ngwenya, if you'll turn on the microphone, just press that. Oh,
Press the other one. There are 2 bars there.
there you go.
Eish,
Thank you,
I'm
Mr.
old
Ngwenya.
school.
Not at all.
Chair, she handed me a bunch of documentary evidence, which consisted of the contracts, that is the contract between SA Express and the Northwest government, and the contract between SA Express and Koroneka. And the SMS communication between Ms. Tlatsana and Mr. Van Wyk. She also handed me the bank statement, the Koroneka bank statement that depicted as to how much was paid into Koroneka by SA Express and the Northwest government, and how it was dispersed after, it was received. The transactions that took place after. What else did she give me? Correspondence between her and Mr. Van Wyk, and there was one between her and where she sent an email to the GM Legal Risk and Compliance. It was quite a number of those, and the audio recordings. Quite a number of those audio recordings. Some of those audio recordings were recorded over the telephone conversation. Some, it was on the recorder, where they were sitting in a particular restaurant around the Northwest. So that's basically what she handed over to me.
Thank you.
I hope I did not leave anything.
No, I was checking. I would have referred you to it if there was something in your affidavit that you'd neglected to mention. Mr. Ngwenya, at paragraph 20 on page 7, you talk about the sum total of the amounts that those bank statements reflected had been received by Koroneka. What are those amounts?
31 million rands was received from SA Express. However, it was not a lump sum, it was in tranches.
We'll go into that in due
Yes,
course.
and then the 20 million rand that was coming from the Northwest Department of Transport.
So in total 51 million, is that
51
right?
million, correct.
And if we then move to paragraph 21, in paragraph 21 you start to recount the events that then unfolded after that weekend from Monday the 27th. Can you take us through what steps you took on that Monday?
The Monday, of course, let me just say the Sunday I went through the recording, but I did not listen to all of them. Then the Monday, because already I had established through the recording chair as to how much was Mr. Van Wyk implicated and all, the amounts that were involved and all that. And that on one of the recordings, Mr. Van Wyk had implicated the chairperson of the SA Express board, as well as the CEO and some
chairperson of
SA Express board,
okay,
as well as the CEO, Mr. Inathi Njanga. By the way, the chairperson of the SA Express board, though he did not mention the name, his name is the then chairperson, Mr. George Mutema. He also implicated prominent people within the national and provincial government, ministers, and the rest that I would mention as we go along on his what you call
on the recording.
On the recording, yes. Then the Monday, I called.
What day of the week was it a Saturday when you met with her?
I met with her on a Saturday.
Yes.
I
Okay.
left the Northwest at night. I got home just before midnight.
Okay.
Then the Sunday, I went through the recordings.
Yes.
In particular, the one that she played for me, where these individuals were implicated. So I listened on that one, I played that one repeatedly so as to understand as to, what was this whole story. Then my approach the following day was that I needed to get the CEO and the GM, legal risk and compliance, together so I can deliver the news. Then the Monday morning, I remember on that Monday, that was the 27th of June, there was an EXCO meeting that was supposed to take place on that day. So I went to work, arrived early, of course. I tried to get hold of Mrs. Muchwili, and without any success. I tried Mr. Inathi Njanga, the CEO. I couldn't reach him. When I was at work, I think she was on her way to work. I managed to reach her. And I told her that, I needed to see her urgently and together with the CEO because I've got some news to deliver to them. And, it's pertaining the contract in the Northwest where it's alleged that the GM commercial, Mr. Brian Van Wyk, to a certain extent was manipulating the system, corruption. And I indicated to her that I had evidence supporting the allegation. And, I sat in my office. On arrival, she came directly to my office to listen to what I had to say.
Who was that now?
That's, sorry, Chair. That's Mrs. Muchwili,
The
the GM legal risk and compliance.
Yes, okay.
Yes. The boss of security management, so to speak. So I delivered the news to her to say, this is what I have, but I would also want the CE to be part of this. Please just get the CE. She left my office and she went. At that time, the CE was already, at work. She spoke to the CE advisor to say, hey, there's this thing that is happening and Tim wants to see us and all that. Now, the CE excused himself from the EXCO meeting, of which the GM legal did say. So we went and sat in the CE's office, excuse me, in the CEO's office, Mr. Inathi Njanga. And when we got there, I actually explained to them, as to why I wanted to see them. I told them that I received a call on Friday from a person who's based, in the Northwest, and this person alleged that Mr. Brian Van Wyk was corrupt and in a way was trying to take over her company. And that person is actually the owner of the company called Coroneka, which is the ground service provider for SA Express in the Northwest airports. And I said to them, I had requested this person not to go to the media because she wanted to report this. And I also promised her that I would ensure that the CE gives her a call so as to confirm that the matter was reported to the highest office within the organization as promised. So when I got there, I explained all that to say I've got the audio recordings. You know, I actually had the evidence with me. And there's audio recordings. I explained the audio recordings to say some of those were recorded over, you know, the telecon between Mr. Van Wyk and Ms. Tlatsana and other officials from the Northwest, you know, and also there was one that I focused specifically on because of it touched on the SA Express individual, where it implicated the CE. I told him straight to say it implicated, Mr. Van Wyk actually implicated you on that particular recording, and the board chairperson, Mr. Mutema.
Mr. Mngwenya, if I may, just yes. There, to locate you in your affidavit, we're at page 8, and it's paragraph 24, because there you are recounting what was specifically said in relation to that recording that you're dealing with at the moment.
Yes.
What I would like you to just be clear about is when you say the recordings implicated people, in what conduct were they implicated?
Okay. One, how Mr. Van Wyk implicated the chairperson and the CEO of SA Express. He said they were the ones who actually initiated the deal, who were in charge of the negotiations pertaining this whole deal, and that they were aware of the transactions that were taking place, you know, the movement of money and all that. So they were privy to everything that was happening, and that he said he was acting based on instructions. He was not Mr. Van Wyk, that's Mr. Van Wyk, that he was not doing things on his own.
And Mr. Ngwenya, there were other people mentioned on that audio recording. Yes. Chair, just to facilitate the remainder of the evidence, we do have the recordings, and the proposal is to have them played during the evidence of Ms. Tlatsana because she was
yes.
in those conversations
yes.
at
yes.
the time.
Yes.
But we're getting, in a sense, the bigger picture of the story through
yeah.
Mr. Ngwenya's evidence.
Yeah.
And so, Mr. Ngwenya, if we can take you to paragraph 24, you list there the other people who were implicated in the audio recording. Could you please read for us who those individuals are?
Okay, apart from the chairperson and the CEO of SA Express,
yes.
The other individuals that were implicated was the then Minister of the DPE, Lynn Brown, and the then Minister of Department of Transport, Minister Dipuo Peters, the Premier of the Northwest, Mr. Supra Mahumapelu, the HOD of the Northwest, which I assume that was Mr. Bailey Mahlakuleng, and the CFO, of which I don't know the name, it was not mentioned as to who the person was, the MEC from the Northwest, and Mr. Volmar Rans, whom she alleged that was more like a right-hand man of the Premier. Mm-hmm. Those were the individuals that were implicated.
And that particular recording, where did you understand it was taken?
In one, according to her, it was somewhere in the spare. It's a recording. It was not a telecon, but she recorded while they were sitting. You know, she hit the recorder somehow. As they were talking, she recorded the whole conversation.
And Mr. Ngwenya, just to be clear, how were these individuals implicated in the recording? Because I understood you to say the CEO and the chairperson had been implicated as having given instructions in relation to these transactions. How were these other individuals implicated on the recording?
Okay, on this recording, maybe it's one thing that I did not really mention, I omitted. On this recording, Chair, as Mr. Van Wyk was explaining to Ms. Tlatsana, you know, as to who was supposed to get paid, you know, on all the monies, he scribbled on a document, he scribbled the names, because of at some stage he said, I don't have to mention names. But if you look at the document that I'm actually about to talk about, and you listen to the recording, you'd realize that it's the very same document that as he was talking, he was scribbling. He mentioned the names and these titles to say, all of them, they are supposed to be paid. In actual fact, there was a bit of a disagreement between her and Ms. Tlatsane in relation to the amounts to be paid to these individuals. On that particular recording, he mentioned that the ministers, they are supposed to get 2020, and Ms. Tlatsane objected to that to say, but initially you said it's 10. You're changing from time to time, in terms of how much they were supposed to be paid.
Mr. Ngwenya, I do apologize for interrupting. Chair, we've been told that there's a need for some technical matter to be attended to. I wonder if a short adjournment might be possible, particularly if it relates to the recording. We need to get that right.
Okay, I'll take a short adjournment and we'll be told as soon as the technical problem has been sorted out.
Thank you, Chair.
We adjourn. Yes, are you ready?
Indeed, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ngwenya, we were dealing with how precisely the persons referred to on the recording were implicated in the dealings between the Northwest and South African Express and Coroneka. And as I have it just before the break, you were detailing how there had been some discussion of the amounts that were to be paid to these individuals. Is that correct?
Correct.
So was your understanding that they were implicated insofar as they had been recipients of funds out of monies that had been paid to Coroneka? Was that your understanding?
Correct.
May I just take you back a little bit? The meeting between yourself and the owner of Coroneka on that Saturday, what did it reveal as the purpose for her wanting you to give you all this information? Was the position that she was complaining that there were attempts to get rid of her business and bring in somebody else? Is that what prompted her to want to approach you? Or did she say it was simply a concern that maybe money that should stay with her business was being paid out because there were these other people that needed to be paid and she had had enough of it? Or what had prompted this?
I think firstly, Chair, the fact that Mr. Van Wyk wanted to take her out of the business, replace her company, and money was actually spent. There were these illicit transactions, from her account, where money was transferred to numerous accounts, the 31 million. To a certain extent, I think she could not really account for the 31 million because she was not directly involved in the disbursement of that 31 million rands.
But it came into the account of her company?
It came into her account, yes. It came into her account.
But she would have been the one who dispensed it, isn't it?
I'm getting there, Chair. What actually happened, this Mr. David Kalisilira, who was the accountant, according to her, based on the instruction of Mr. Van Wyk, because of initially, let me mention this, they had an account with the FNB branch. She told me that she was told by Mr. Van Wyk to open that account in the first place. She had to give her account credentials, the pins and whatsoever, to Mr. Kalisilira, so he can operate and disperse the funds whichever way. Yes. So she actually voluntarily, based on the instruction, handed that information to Mr. Kalisilira, who was responsible to handle the funds.
Okay, thank you. I interrupted you, Ms. Hofmeyer.
Not at all, Chair. So we were dealing with how these people were implicated that were referenced on the audio recording. And as I have it, you relayed that to the CEO and the GM of legal in that meeting on the Monday. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then if we go to paragraph 25 on page 8,
yes.
You were testifying earlier, Mr. Ngwenya, that you'd made an undertaking to Ms. Tlatsana that she would be phoned,
yes,
so that she knew that this matter had been taken up by the highest authority within SA Express. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then as I have it at paragraph 25, you detail the precise call that you did then make to Ms. Tlatsana.
Correct.
Can you take us through that?
Okay, after explaining, of course, and indicating that the CEO, in fact, I requested or asked him to phone Ms. Tlatsana as a confirmation that the matter was brought to his attention. He agreed to that, and I dialed Ms. Tlatsana's contact because in the room, amongst the three of us, I was the only one who had her contact at that juncture. So I dialed the number of Miss Tlatsana, and I made some form of an introduction to say it was me, and I'm with the CEO and the GM legal risk and compliance. And as promised, they want to talk to her pertaining the issue. They introduced themselves to her, the CEO, Mr. Inathi Nchanga, and Ms. Miriam Muchwili. And then Ms. Tlatsana just let it go. You know, she was talking as if, you know, she had some form of...
She poured out everything she wanted to say.
Yes, and you know...
Repeating the same things that...
To say she's been willing to speak to Mr. Nchanga, to report, you know, what Mr. Van Wyk was actually doing to her. And, you know, Mr. Van Wyk was sort of taking her for granted, playing with her, wanting to take her company and things like that. She you know, she poured everything out. She let it out, but...
And a lot of it was...
even telling
was
him,
in the recording as you had
yes,
to listen to it.
Yes, in actual fact, that conversation was recorded as well, Mr. Chair.
Okay, where
yes.
she was pouring out.
That recording was,
Yeah.
that conversation was actually recorded.
Okay.
Ms.
Na-
Ngwenya, by whom?
Record, I'm sorry. By Miss Tlatsana.
Right. But you did
Oh.
obtain,
Yes, yes.
Ms.
I was-
Tlatsana was at this stage recording many
She
conversations.
was not playing with fire. She was recording almost everything. When you talk to her, you know that she was recording.
But
So-
you did subsequently obtain that recording from her, didn't you?
Absolutely. In fact, it's two recordings because during the course of that conversation, we were cut off somehow. And the CEO stood up and left the room. I take it that he went to the bathroom. And I redialed the number, Ms. Tlatsana. And Ms. Muchwili had to indicate to her to say, hey, you know what, we were cut out, and the CEO just left the room, but he will be back. He went to the bathrooms. While she was explaining that, the CEO walked in, and then the conversation went on again, and she gave it all. Then we were done. Later on, I requested those conversations, the recordings, from Ms. Tlatsana, and then she forwarded those to me via WhatsApp.
Mr.
Those 2 sets
Ngwenya,
of recordings.
you have that conversation, it's in 2 parts and it's recorded as I have it. You got those from her later. But if you go to page 9 of your affidavit, you'll see that towards the bottom of that page, paragraph 28,
Yes.
you talk about how seriously you took the allegations and what you then said to Mr. Nchanga in the light of what had been recounted to you previously and on the call. What did you say to him?
Can I step back a bit and
Of
get
course.
back? The document that I was talking about, the scribbled document.
Yes, just for the record, if we may, Chair, there is a photocopy of that document, which appears as Annexure 1. So it'll be behind tab 1 at page 32. This is also a document, Chair, that we propose to deal with in Ms. Tlatsana's evidence, because
Okay.
she was actually present as we have her
Yes.
evidence as this was being drawn out
Okay.
by Mr. Van Wyk. But it did come to Mr. Ngwenya when those documents were first handed over.
Yes.
And absolutely, you're correct. There's an interaction you have with Mr. Nchanga
Yes.
about the handwriting on this page. Is that what you wanted to go
Absolutely.
to?
That's what I want to raise.
Thank
yes.
you.
Chair, as I've explained that, you know, I brought the evidence, the recordings and all that, and I specifically mentioned the parts that was actually relevant to them in terms of the recording. I also produced this document, which was scribbled, you know, and Ms. Tlatsana alleged that it was Mr. Van Wyk who wrote on this document. So I produced these documents. this document and I showed it to the CEO and the GM legal.
At that meeting?
Come again?
You showed it to them at that meeting?
At that meeting, yes.
Yeah. And the meeting was on Monday?
It was on Monday, the very same
The
Monday.
first Monday after the Saturday meeting with Ms. Tlasana?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, Chair. So when I produced this document, the CEO looked at it and he confirmed the writing on this document as that of Mr. Brian Van Wyk, the GM commercial, and the GM legal, Ms. Miriam Ochwili, concurred with Mr. Njanga to say indeed this was the handwriting of Mr. Van Wyk. Then it was clear, definitely, that Mr. Van Wyk was somehow involved in this whole thing. I then said or rather advised the CEO to say, based on the nature of these transactions, the amount involved, and the fact that Mr. Brian Van Wyk was an employee of SA Express and the GM for that matter, I mean, the amount that was involved in this regard was the 31 million rand that came out of the SA Express account. I advised the CE, based on Section 34 of the PRECA Act 12 of 2004, that she had a responsibility as a person who's in a position of authority to report these transactions to the authorities.
And Ms. Ngwenya, just to be clear, PRECA is the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act, is that right?
Correct, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yes.
So you advised him to make a report
Yes.
in accordance with the obligations set out in Section 34 of that Act, is that right?
Absolutely, absolutely, ma'am.
And then if you pick it up at the bottom of page 9, paragraph 28,
Yes.
I understand that Mr. Nchanga then suggested you should investigate the matter. Is that correct?
That is correct, ma'am.
And what was to be the scope of the investigation?
I think there were 3 facts that I had to establish. And all those were around the appointment of Koroneka and the allegations that were made by Ms. Tlatsana pertaining to Mr. Van Wyk. I had to establish if what she alleged was true or not. I also had to establish if the appointment of Koroneka was as per, I think, the procurement process within Express, and also the appointment of Koroneka as a facility management was as according to the agreement between SA Express and the Northwest government. I think I'm correct to say that.
Indeed.
When he gave me that mandate, it was not a written mandate, Chair. It was a verbal. As far as this is concerned, I think, you know, in any case, when you are given a mandate, it has to be written, especially when you're dealing with people, you know, who are on a higher level than yourself. So that I did not get. But then I raised 2 issues with him to say, much as you're giving me this scope and the mandate, I want to make it clear to you that, 1, I can only be able to investigate all the transgressions that occurred within SA Express. And that, secondly, I will not be able to investigate any party that is outside SA Express because I don't have any authority towards those individuals. And the fact that prominent people were implicated, I may not be able to establish the facts around that, including the implication of the SA Express board chairperson. That's what I said to him in relation to the scope.
And Mr. Ngwenya, I then have your affidavit to be picked up at page 11, because some of what is still contained on page 10 you've already dealt with in your oral testimony. But what you say at page 11, paragraph 33, is you talk about, as I have it, after the conclusion of that meeting, what you then started to do, still on that same Monday, to further investigate the matter. And Mr. Ngwenya, just to frame the next bit of the evidence, as I have it, you start with the legal department, you then go and make inquiries of the finance department, and then you engage with procurement. So if we could take each of those in order, what do you seek to establish with the legal department first?
The legal department at the time was responsible for the contract management, which means every contract that SA Express was involved in, they were kept at legal. The files were kept at legal. So after the meeting with Mrs. Muchwili, the GM legal, and the CEO, after we listened to the recordings and, giving everything, I went to the legal department after being given the mandate to try and establish as to whether there was a contract in place in the first place, So when I got to legal, at the time there was a person who was the legal advisor by the name of Miss Nasipi Mkentana. I went and spoke to her pertaining the issue, and I said to her, I was actually looking for the contract for the Northwest, which involved Koroneka. Ms. Mkentana said to me, Northwest, I don't have the contract that relates to Northwest, ground handling services. But one thing that I can tell you is that I drafted the contract in relation to the ground handling services in the Northwest, in particular the Pilan spec. However, on that contract, she was not aware as to who was the company that was to, provide the service. So she drafted the contract and forwarded it to Mr. Brian van Wyk without the company name, and if my memory serves me well, without the figures as to how much was, to be paid to this, to this entity. And she indicated somehow to say it was an instruction that she received either by Mr. van Wyk or Ms. Muchwili. And she said to me she'll forward everything to me. I then left her office on that day. Then the following morning, I recall, because of, I went through that email. I think it was around 8:25. That was on the 28th. She emailed me.
28th of what month?
June, sorry, the following day.
2015 still.
2016.
Was it 2015 or 16?
2016.
Okay.
Mr. Ngwenya,
And the Saturday when you saw Miss
Tlatlane.
Yeah.
Yes.
Was it June?
It was June the 24th.
Oh, okay, so it's still the
It's
same
still the
month.
same week.
Okay.
Exactly.
All
Yes.
right.
So it's the day after I met. It was the 27th. I met with the CE and I met her. Then the following day, on the 28th of June, the Tuesday, Ms. Mkentana forwarded me the contract relating to the draft, actually, relating to this service in Pilani spec.
Mr. Ngwenya, I'd like us to go to that email, if we may. Okay. You'll find it under Annexure 3. It's page 3636.
Yes.
And you'll see at the top of that page, I take it the forwarding that Ms. Mketani engaged in to get the draft agreement to you, as well as the email that is contained lower down on that page. And that is an email, as I read it, of the 10th of April 2015. Is that correct?
That's correct, ma'am.
And who is it from and to?
You mean the email?
Yes.
The email is from Mrs. Miriam Muchwili to the then GM or General Manager Operations, Mr. Dave Allenby. Also to Mr. Brian Tebucho van Wyk, who was the GM Commercial
And
at
copied,
SA Express.
And copied to Ms. Mketani.
And copied to Ms. Nasipi Mkentana.
What I'm interested in relation to that email, Mr. Ngwenya, is what Ms. Moshweli says to, first of all, Mr. Allenby, because she first of all asks that somebody in his department look at the attached agreement to ensure it sufficiently and appropriately captures what needs to be captured.
Yes.
She says it is still very much a draft. We will still need to polish it up.
Yes.
However, in the interest of time, I suggest that your department also have a look at it at this stage. That person can work with Nasipi, who will be responsible for finalizing the draft. And then what does she say at the bottom, at Brian? What do you understand the at Brian to mean?
Oh, she was directly speaking to Mr. Van Wyk.
Right. And what does she say there?
I can simply read this part. At Brian, I guess we need to ask the province to advise us as to who the management company is going to be, so that we can meet with them just to make sure that there is an understanding on what is expected, as well as go through the financial aspects.
Right. And then if we can return to your affidavit, and we are now at page 12, the top paragraph there, 35. You deal there with your impression of the email. Can you
Yes.
tell us what your impression was at the time?
My impression at the time, especially pertaining to that email, is that Mrs. Moshweli was well aware. Let me just explain this. Mrs. Moshweli, as a GM, she was also the chairperson of the BAC, the Bid Adjudication Committee. She was the chairperson. Now, the impression that I got was that she had a knowledge already around in April that there was no procurement process followed, because, as a matter of fact, this was supposed to be brought to the BAC because of the figures on the contract. They exceeded the 500,000, which is RFQ. So it was RFP. There was supposed to be a request for proposals. Now, as the chairperson of the BAC, she knew at the time that nothing was brought to her attention, and yet she continued, to entertain the issue and further, allowing her department to draft a contract, to that effect, knowingly so that there was no procurement process that was followed, and that was a violation.
And Ms. Ngwenya, at paragraph 36 on the same page, you then talk about your next step, as I have it in the sequence, was to go to the finance department. What did you want to establish there, and what did you establish?
Okay, remember I mentioned that there were payments made to the amount of 31 million rands. So already at that juncture, I had established that with legal, there was no file or agreement that was there. My next step was to go to the finance department so as to establish as to how was this money paid to Koronega, and that much as well. So I went to the finance department and I interviewed the supervisor there by the name of Ms. Busisiwe Mavuso. Ms. Busisiwe Mavuso confirmed to me that yes, indeed, there were payments that were made to that 31 million, and that there were invoices submitted to the department.
And what did you say was her position?
She was the supervisor at finance.
Okay.
She's supervising the creditors, clerks,
Yes,
and all that.
okay.
Yes, the
The
payment
staff.
processes, the payments are processed there and all that, and they go to treasury. So now she said to me she was given the invoices and the expense authorization. Now the invoices were Koronega invoices claiming, payments from SA Express, and also there were expense authorization. Expense authorization, it's an internal document, SA Express internal document, where when there's money to be spent, payments or whatsoever, certain individuals who are designated to sign as per the DOA, Delegation of Authority Chair, in terms of the amounts that are reflected on that document. They would sign that document. So in that regard, Ms. Busisiwe produced those documents. It was four invoices and 4 expense authorizations, which were approved by Mr. Van Veek, and Mr. Inachinchanga, the CEO, also endorsed, he appended his signature to sort of approve these, these payments.
And Mr. Ngwenya, we'll go to those payments in detail. They total the 31 million that you were concerned to uncover, the sort of tracking of the funds out of SA Express. But before we get to that, just at the conclusion of paragraph 36,
yes,
you are able to establish how Coroneka came onto the SAP system of SA Express. How did that happen?
This, when I interviewed Ms. Mavuso, she stated that she was verbally instructed by the CFO, Mr. Mark Shelley, the then CFO, Mr. Mark Shelley, to say she needed to load the details of Coroneka on our vendor, as a vendor on the SAP system. And once information is uploaded there, it's definitely for the purpose of payments. Now, this actually happened on the 5th of May. Now, Mr. Chair, on the one of the invoices and the expense auth, you'd see that it was prepared day before for payment. And on the 5th, Mr. Mark Shelley instructed her to say load on the system. She did exactly that. And there's a document in this on the bundle that gives an indication to say this was actually done on the 5th of May, where Coroneka's details were uploaded on SAP. The following day, 8.5 million was transferred from SA Express account into the Coroneka account.
Thank you. Ms. Ngwenya, we'll come to your investigation as to whether there was a basis for that payment. But before we get there, if we may, you do this you have this engagement with the Finance Department on the 28th of June.
Yes.
You only go to the Procurement Department a few days after that. But what I'd like to do in the middle is just talk about what happened on the 1st of July, because there were certain plans in anticipation in relation to Mr. Van Veek, and then Mr. Van Veek took certain steps in so far as his relationship with SA Express is concerned. Can you tell us what that is?
Yes. On this instance, we had a plan. I must indicate, Chair, that I could hardly recall the number of meetings that we had between myself, Mr. Inachinchanga, and Ms. Miriam Uchili. Now, there was a plan on the day. There was a disciplinary hearing on that day against a subordinate of Mr. Brian Van Veek. And of course, I testified on that day. But the plan was that we needed to suspend, or the company needed to suspend Mr. Brian Van Veek. So we had a plan in place, and the plan was only known to myself, the then employee relations senior specialist, Ms. Nomfusi Gagini, and it was also known to her boss, the GM of HC Human Capital, which is HR, Mrs. Khatile Nkala, and of course, the CEO. Now, the plan was that he would be suspended, and I would confiscate his access card and, the laptop, all those gadgets and therefore walk him out, except for the cell phones because of he needed still to report. He was still an employee. And I needed to escort him out of the premises. Then we planned to say we're going to execute. Now, if my memory serves me well, because Ms. Dagini was sitting in there and we had plotted it to say, once you're done, you give me an indication so I can come up and we can execute as planned. I remember at that time when I think she sent me an SMS. Cannot recall how but I think it was an SMS or a WhatsApp. Now, to say we're ready, we can action. I went to the HCGM because she needed to be present and advised her to say, we're ready, we can go. I walked with her to Mr. Brian van Wyk, where the disciplinary hearing was actually taking place of his subordinate. When I got there, as we were walking, at third floor, because he was based at third floor. From the second floor, we went to third floor. Ms. Nkala stayed behind. She spoke to somebody. I think that was deliberate, Mr. Chair, because I ended up walking into the office alone. And as we were talking and about to execute the plan, I heard Ms. Nkala talking towards the door of Mr. Van Wyk. She was talking to somebody within, the company around the third floor. I could hear her voice. And because of Mr. Brian van Wyk, how he was seated, he could see, in between the gap of the door and the other side of his office. Now, I saw him looking towards the door and back to us. And then she said, excuse me. He said, excuse me. That was the last time I saw him. So my view.
He left the room.
He said, excuse me.
And never returned.
Now the GM, HC, did not enter the room. He stood right at the door. He looked towards the door and he looked at us and he said, guys, excuse me. He stood up and went out of the office. That was the last time I saw him. So what it means, Mr. Van Wyk disappeared from the premises. He ran away, literally ran away. He was advised, and honestly, I can certainly bet that the HCGM advised him accordingly. So he disappeared.
Mr. Ngwenya, you don't have any direct knowledge of that advice being given, do you?
Come again.
You don't know for a fact
Absolutely.
that advice was given.
I don't know for a fact.
Thank you.
I don't know for a fact. No, I cannot say that. It's just that he looked at that where she was standing and he stood up. Then he did not come back. And she did not come back too. She did not come back too.
And she was supposed to go into the room with you?
With me.
For purposes of execution.
Hence, my assumption is that she is the person that gave the information to Mr. Van Wyk.
But did you see her again?
Yes, she remained in the company.
And did you confront her to say,
No.
what happened to you?
I did not even confront her because we waited there and we noticed that he was not coming back. He stood up to try and look and he was gone. I did not even confront her really. I did not. That was it. That's how we
Mr.
left.
Ngwenya, you were thereafter asked to write up charges against Mr. Van Wyk, is that correct?
That is correct.
That was a few days later, as I have it. If you go over the page to page 13, you'll see that your first paragraph there, 38, talks about the fact that you were asked to write up charges. Was any disciplinary process ever conducted in relation to Mr. Van Wyk?
No disciplinary action was taken against Mr. Brian Van Wyk. However, I was requested by the GM Legal Risk and Compliance, Mrs. Muchwili, to write up charges in relation to the transgression that Mr. Brian Van Wyk has committed for the purpose of, dealing with the matter, disciplining him. I did exactly that with the assistance of the Employee Relations Senior Specialist, Ms. Dagini. We tabled those charges, and later on, I handed the hard copy to Mrs. Mochwili.
And you also, as I understand it, then suggested to Mr. Nshanga that it would be best if the matter was to be handed over to external forensic investigation. Is that right?
That is right, ma'am.
When did that, sorry, and what was his response to that?
When I indicated that, you know, the best way was to hand this over to a forensic investigator. Firstly, the purpose was that, you know, I could see that there was something more deeper than I thought on this whole thing. So I wanted, you know, the whole thing to be exposed. Moreover, it was becoming clearer to me that he was definitely involved, the CEO was definitely involved. So I said, you know what, I recommend that you give the matter to a forensic investigator. His response to me was that, no, it's not a good idea because of the forensic investigator was definitely going to go to blow this whole thing out of proportion.
Mr. Ngwenya, you then at paragraph 39 on page 13 talk about your efforts at the procurement department. And as I understand your evidence in relation to your endeavors with the procurement department, you were able to establish that there had been no notification of a tender or other RFP process that was embarked upon prior to the award of the conclusion of the agreement with Coroneka. Is that correct?
That is correct, ma'am.
And if we go over the page to page 14, you'll see at paragraph 41, you even went so far as to check whether there wasn't some sort of deviation from the ordinary tender process that might have been followed in order to legitimize or give some legal underpinning to the contract with Coroneka. Were you able to find any such deviation authorization?
Not at all, ma'am. Chair, when I went there, in actual fact, I interviewed two people. The first one, it was on I think the 4th.
Yes.
I spoke to Mr. Zakaria Rabutata, who is the procurement officer at SA Express, and he's still there. I inquired about the tender issued or advertised pertaining, you know, this ground handling in the Northwest. He said he wasn't aware of any, you know, of such. He looked on his system, he did not find anything, no deviation, no business case, nothing in relation to the procurement process. So he confirmed to me that there was nothing. Then later on, I went to his boss, Ms. Pumza Ngoma, who was the divisional manager of the procurement department. I interviewed her pertaining two issues. The first one was Coroneka in relation to the procurement processes, whether she was aware, whether she had any documentation within the procurement space that she can provide to me, you know, as proof that somehow the process was actually followed. And she said she was not involved in any of such. Probably her predecessor was definitely involved. Because of now, the second element was this Valotech. Remember, I was already informed about Valotech taking over. And I wanted to know about Valotech. And I said to her, okay, the Valotech contract, what happened? Do we have a contract first within our procurement space? She said SA Express doesn't have a signed contract to that effect. Valotech Express. I remember at that juncture there was a file, and that file spoke to the RFQ process where she requested the codes from the three companies.
Mr. Ngwenya, can we go to that document? Because it might be helpful just to look at it as you refer to it in your evidence.
Okay.
You'll find it as Annexure 5, and it's at page 41, 41.
Okay.
Now, this is, as I understand it, what you were referring to. It is a letter from SA Express addressed to Valotech Facilities Management. Is that as you understand the letter?
Correct.
And
That's it, Chair.
the date of the letter?
19 May 2016.
And what is the heading of the letter?
It's provision of labor broking services, stroke 3 codes.
So can I just pause for a moment? I take it that labor broking services is something different to ground handling at an airport.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And the first paragraph says the above mentioned 3-quote system in which you participated has reference. This letter serves to inform that you have been selected as the preferred bidder. This letter of appointment is effective from the 19th of May 2016. Further to this letter, SA Express Airways and Valotech Facilities Management shall enter into a service level agreement for the duration of the contract as agreeable to by both parties. We trust that this award shall be beneficial and fruitful to both parties. So, do I understand that this was in the Valotech file?
Correct.
There was no record of the Valotech SA Express contract in the file,
It wasn't there.
but you have subsequently been shown that. Is that correct?
That is correct.
But you were not told of any process that was followed in relation to ground handling services prior to the conclusion of the contract with Valotech. Is that right?
That's correct.
So is this letter about labor broking services literally all that you could find in relation to Valotech in the records of the procurement department?
Yes, and of course the correspondence, the emails, requesting codes from
Yes.
3 entities, of which the respondent was only, or the company that responded was Valotech.
But all again, just to be absolutely clear, related to labor broker services.
Yes, because when the codes were requested, it was about labor broking services, not ground handling.
Thank you. And then if we return to your statement, at least your affidavit at page 15, we now come to the point at paragraph 45, because you've now been to a legal department, you've been to finance department, you've been to procurement department, you've interviewed a number of people, as I have your evidence, and then as I read at paragraph 45, you prepared a preliminary investigation report. Is that right?
That's correct.
And the report is contained as an annexure to your bundle. I don't suggest we go there now, but you then took steps to present these reports to the GM of legal and the CEO. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And what happened when you provided it to the CEO, Mr. Nchanga?
As I recall, in fact, on the 6th of October, after finalizing or compiling that report, I took it and showed it to the GM legal to say, I'm done with the report, this is it, I'm about to hand it over to Mr. Njanga. And I did exactly that. If I'm not mistaken, I handed over the document not on that day, it's either the following week, I cannot remember clearly on that. But when I gave that report to him, I told him that it's the report and it's a preliminary investigation report. I indicated to him at the time to say, but we have sufficient to actually charge Mr. Van Wyk. We had sufficient evidence against him, so we can deal with that. However, there are issues that, I could not sort of reach. Therefore, hence, it remained a preliminary investigation report.
In terms of the timing, was this after he had disappeared, Mr. Van Wyk, or was it before?
Long after.
Long after.
Chair. Long after. Long after he disappeared.
Like 2 months, 3 months?
He disappeared
In June?
in July.
The
July.
1st of July,
The
as
1st
I
of
have
July,
it.
he disappeared.
And we're now on the 6th of October, is that
October,
right?
yes.
But
Now-
we are still talking about whether to charge him or not.
Yes, yes, Chair. It was on that. One, I must indicate, Chair, that as I said that I was responsible to run security. I was the sole member of the security department, responsible for different areas within the security space. I can break them, break it down to aviation security. Now, aviation security deals with the regulation. Now, there are parts that I was actually supposed to deal with within the civil aviation, regulation, which is part 108 that deals with air cargo security. I was responsible for that, and I was the designated officer for air cargo security within the entity. Number two, I was also responsible for the part 109 to ensure that every single employee involved in the operation was trained. The security awareness training was provided to those individuals. It was my responsibility to ensure that everyone within the company. Now, Mr. Chair, you must understand that my operation was not limited to OR Tambo. I was actually responsible entirely for the, operation within and outside South Africa. All those airports, I was actually responsible single-handedly. Now, there was also the part 111, which is aviation security, that talks to the designation as well, as a security manager, which somehow is in line with the part 121 in terms of the AOC. The AOC, which is the Airline Operator Certificate. So, I'm all over the show. Now, there was corporate security that I was responsible for. There was physical security that I was also responsible for. And, investigations as well.
Yes,
so
I guess
there was quite a lot.
I guess you are saying that to say there was a lot you had to do.
Absolutely.
But I wasn't asking you because I was thinking you were slow. I was just wondering.
No, I'm just trying to clarify, Chair,
I was
so that you
wondering-
can get the picture.
I was wondering why you would be talking about whether to charge somebody that has that left about 4 months previously
Well,
under the circumstances in which he left. Anyway, yes.
Mr. Ngwenya, I do take it that after, from your affidavit, after you delivered this preliminary report to Mr. Nchanga, your evidence at page 15 indicates you raised again with him your section 34 precca concern. And as I understand paragraph 46 on that page, he then told you that he wanted you to report to him. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. In fact, at that time, I was already reporting to him directly. I was a direct report. So, based on the instruction from the Civil Aviation Authority to say, as a designated person, I have to report to the highest office in the company. So, based on that, I was already reporting to him. So, Ms. Mlangeni and Mrs. Muchwili were really out of the picture. So I was directly reporting to him. Now, on that day, when I spoke to him on that meeting, I reiterated the section 34 to say, you have a responsibility. You need to report this. And that was in the presence of Ms. Miriam Muchwili, who perhaps here there's nothing that can substantiate that, but just for the interest, of this evidence, Chair, Ms. Muchwili confirmed to a board member, Mr. Trevor Abrams, who confronted us before he actually opened a case in relation to this, incentive. She confirmed that I actually advised the CE about this section. So, that was it.
And Mr. Ngwenya, You then, so let's just get right in time. This is in October of 2016.
Yes.
I understand that there was one addition you wanted to make to the affidavit and in your evidence about a further interaction you had with Mr. Nchanga in early 2017 about the report and what concerns he raised with you in relation to the relationship between South African Express and the Northwest Department of Transport.
Yes, Chair. In fact, I omitted part of that information because it was quite a lot. In this regard, Chair, after we've discussed this report, and I've already explained to him to say what was the reason for me to hand him the preliminary. I've explained that the investigation was not concluded, even though we had enough to deal with Mr. Van Wyk when I gave him that report. Now, I waited as I was busy, not that I sat back and looked at what he was actually doing, but, you know, I thought he would act on the recommendation of my, you know, on the preliminary report recommendation. And I actually realized that, you know, he was not really acting. And Chair, I must indicate that he wanted us, you know, to discuss the matter throughout, verbally so. No email because
To discuss or to discard?
Discuss.
Or to discuss,
yes. That we discuss whatever issue, the updates and all that. I mustn't send emails. We must sit and talk about it. Now, I handed this report to him. You know, I hand-delivered to him. Now I'm waiting, and I see the clock is ticking. No action is actually taken. Now, you know, at that time, I figured out to say, you know, this might place me in a very awkward position in that there was no trail, you know, paper trail or emails showing that there was an interaction, you know, between me, him, you know, in relation to this. I therefore decided on the very same month to email the very same report to one of, or at the time I wasn't really aware, I emailed to him. On the 8th of November, a lady who was working in the...
Still 2016, eh?
Still 2016, yes, the very same month, Chair. And then the following month, on the 8th of November, after the 31st, after I forwarded, I received a call from a lady who was a communication specialist. She still is within the company. She said to me, "Hey, I'm sorry, I'm not interfering with the investigation or whatsoever, but I can see that you've sent a report onto this email, you know, which belongs to Mr. Nchanga. But this email is also used by the communication department, you know, to communicate whatever, you know, that is received from Mr. Nchanga. Therefore, you know, we have access to this report. However, I've deleted it. I can swear, you know, I'm not privy to the content. Therefore, send this email directly to the, send this report directly to this email." She gave me the email, which was the correct one.
For Mr. Nchanga?
For Mr. Nchanga, yes. I then sent that report to Mr. Nchanga. I must indicate that Mr. Nchanga had 4 email addresses within SA Express. There was Inati Nchanga at Fly Express. There was Nchanga at Fly Express. There was Nchanga at Fly Express. There was Inati.Nchanga at Fly Express. So it's 4 email addresses. So she directed me as to which one I should use. I therefore sent that report to that email.
And Mr. Ngwenya, that's at the end of 2016 as I have it?
That was the 8th of November.
November.
Yes.
And then you have an interaction with him in early 2017 about the report, and he says he, as I understand your evidence, he has a concern about the relationship between SA Express and the Northwest. Can you tell us about that conversation?
Yes. In fact, prior to that, after sending that report, I think on the 12th of December, the HCGM, and I think I omitted that information on this, followed up pertaining the investigation, where she asked me as to how far are you with the investigation? And I said to her, as far as I'm concerned, I completed the investigation, and I since delivered the report to the CEO with the recommendations, and you can touch base with him to establish the facts. And I guess she went back to him because she did not come back to me.
But wasn't the report that you had sent to Mr. Nchanga
That's exactly the one.
a preliminary report?
That's exactly the one, Chair.
Well, what's confusing me is that you're saying you have completed the investigation,
Okay.
but you have only prepared a temporary or preliminary report.
As I've stated, Chair, to say we had grounds to deal with Mr. Van Wyk, who was the subject of the
Yes.
the matter. Now, in that regard, Mr. Van Wyk part, in actual fact, I had
Oh, you
all
had
the facts. It
completed
was
that
concluded
part.
in that regard.
Okay.
But because there were other parties
Yes.
involved
Okay.
that I could not, expose
Yes.
in that regard, then
Yeah.
I felt that it was proper of me to submit it as a preliminary investigation, because if I was to submit it as a final investigation report, that would close everything, that it's limited to this. So yet I wanted continuity.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So it was preliminary only insofar as there were other people that you still needed to investigate, but insofar as Mr. Van Wyk was concerned, it was completed.
Absolutely, Chair.
It was a final report.
Absolutely, not that me investigating those parties, but the third party investigating,
okay,
as
all
per
right.
the recommendation
Oh,
on the preliminary.
okay.
And-
Or you were to have no further role in the investigation.
Absolutely, because
Okay.
of,
All right.
Yes.
Thank you.
And if I may just remind you, Mr. Ngwenya, your recommendations, you'll find them at page 50, which is under Annexure 6. And those recommendations are consistent with the evidence that you've given, I suggest. But you'll let me know if you have a different view. At page 50,
yes,
there is a paragraph number 12.
yes, okay.
And you'll see
Recommendation.
there that there are two recommendations. You say, even though Mr. Brian van Wyk has resigned, that should not prevent SA Express to pursue the matter in case of litigation. And then the second is the matter must be handed over to an external forensic investigator or the Special Investigation Unit for further investigation. That's consistent, isn't it, with your point initially when you got the mandate? You
Correct.
said to Mr. Nchanga, as I have your evidence, I can investigate, but my scope is limited because of my limited access to people, etc. And so you run that investigation on the terms that we've described. Is that correct?
Correct.
Culminates with what you term a preliminary report, as I understand your evidence, because your recommendation was somebody else needs to take this further to finalize.
Correct.
Is that correct? But just to clarify, was your sense that they needed to take it further in relation to Mr. Van Wyk or the greater ambit of the investigation?
The greater ambit, ma'am.
Thank you.
Before you proceed, just two things. You say in under your recommendations, you say Mr. Van Wyk had resigned. Was that because there was a formal resignation letter that he put in, or was that simply because you labeled his disappearance and never to return as resignation?
No, Chair, there was a letter that he submitted, but at that time I was not privy to the letter. I had this from the CEO himself, Mr. Nchanga. Yes.
Okay. And did you recall how soon after his disappearance he put in a letter of resignation? Or is that something you don't know?
Chair, after he disappeared on the 1st, on the 6th, there's a communication platform within SA Express called Corporate Comms. It was pronounced or announced on the Corporate Comms to say he's been suspended effective the 1st of July. Yet the 1st of July, he disappeared. Probably, they met somewhere and he was suspended. Then later on, he told me about his resignation and that he was not really, satisfied.
Mr. Van Wyk told you?
The CEO.
Oh,
the
the
CEO
CEO.
told me, Mr.
Yeah.
Njanga,
Yeah.
that he had resigned, and
But you never saw the actual letter of
I saw
resignation?
it later on.
Or you saw it later
I saw
on?
it later on. Yes,
Oh,
it was
okay.
dated August 2016. No specific date.
Yes.
To say on the 6th or whatever. It says 2016. I mean August 2016.
Okay, just before you proceed, I want to understand something. The colleague of yours with whom you had gone to see Mr. Van Wyk on the day he disappeared, what was the name again? What was her name? The person that you had gone to.
Oh, no, that's not my colleague, actually.
Oh,
that's
yeah.
Mr. Brian Van Wyk's colleague, so to speak,
Yes.
the GM.
Yes, but
yes.
Employed by SA
Employed,
Express
yes,
as
in
well.
that-
What was the name again?
Mrs. Khatile Nkala.
Yes.
Yes.
Now, as you continued with investigation all these months, did anything happen to her? Did anything happen, or was she asked in any way to account as to what happened with her in terms of the decision for the two of you to execute what you needed to execute?
Okay, I recall, Chair, at some stage, because of it wasn't clear at the time whether he resigned or whatsoever, way after, he disappeared. And I kept asking the CEO, and at some stage I also asked her, because of, they were sending me from pillar to post to say, when are we going to execute the disciplinary? That was prior, the resignation. And the CEO said, no, Mrs. Nkala must action that. And I said, but Miss Nkala, and they are equals. And you, actually, the person that is supposed to
Is in higher authority.
He absolutely is, and to discipline. He said, no, speak to her. I went to her, and she sent me back to Mr. Njanga. So there was this game that was actually played. And I recall at some stage trying to find Mr. Njanga. I think it was around the time when, just after Mr. Van Wyk disappeared, I cannot recall, but I think around that time. And I could not find him, and he told me that, he was not around. He did not pick up, actually, my calls.
Mr. Njanga now.
Mr. Njanga, yes. And, because of I already suspected, I remember going to the SOC, the CCTV room within SAA, and reviewed the footage backwards. And
Around the time of Mr. Van Wyk's disappearance.
After Mr. Van Wyk disappeared, because there was something that we spoke about with the CE, and I was actually following up, and he avoided my calls. And eventually, when I got hold of him, he said he was gone. He was not in the premises and all that. On that particular day. And I recall going back, because of I lacked trust on him, honestly, at that juncture. And I went to the CCTV room to review the footage on that day, just to check on his movement. And I realized that at the time when I called him, he was actually at the office of the GMHR on that day. And he was within the premises, so he actually avoided my calls. So I guess to a certain extent, I was a pain to quite a number of people around that time.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Ngwenya, if we can go to page 16 of your affidavit. 16, 1-6, and I'll pick it up at paragraph 47. But just before we get there, you were going to tell us about the conversation in early 2017 with Mr. Njanga in relation to his concerns about the relationship between SA Express and the Northwest government. Can you tell us about that conversation?
Okay. Sorry about that.
Not at all.
Chair, the conversation that I had with him at that juncture, it was about the damage control. of the relationship between SA Express and the Northwest government. Mr. Nchanga was not even talking about my report and the recommendation. Instead, what he was concerned about was me writing, or rather giving him a write-up, that would say the relationship between SA Express and the Northwest can still go on because of we are in charge, we're taking charge of all the other issues, driving me to rectify all the, the wrongs that actually happened. And I said to Mr. Nchanga, that's not my responsibility. You as the CEO, you have to write that and hand it over to the Northwest. That is not my responsibility. My responsibility is to provide the investigation reports as I actually investigated the matter in this regard. And, when I responded like that, he said to me, there's one thing that I don't understand with you. You're conducting investigations as if you're investigating for Coronega. And all I want from you is a write-up, and stop telling me stories and all that. And he left me, we parted ways. And he said, you must make sure that you submit the write-up. And I went back to my office. I thought about it to say, but what is this? What is it exactly that is expected of me because of I've played my part and all that? I then figured out to say, you know what? Here, maybe I might lose my job, but as far as this whole thing is concerned, he doesn't have any grounds. Therefore, I'll stand my ground. I'm going to write a final investigation report, which would be similar to the preliminary investigation report. The difference would be that, the prelim, most of the stuff were in bullet point format. Now, I changed that to paragraphs where I elaborated as to how I went about the investigation. And on top, I wrote it, final investigation report, with the exact same date that was on the preliminary report, 6 October. And then I handed that, I did not sign it. For a simple reason, that was deliberate, because I had confirmed to him that I cannot compile a final investigation report because of the investigation was not actually concluded, in relation to other parties that were involved. I therefore handed the exact same report, and I think it was around February at the time. I gave him that report, which reminds me of something to say. There's something that I actually omitted, Chair. Pardon me.
Indeed.
The whole evidence, I just want to indicate a part that was also played by the GM Legal Risk and Compliance. Chair, Mr. Inati Nchanga, the last time I played the clip and provide any piece of evidence to him, it was on that meeting when I showed them, the documents and all that. But later on, the GM Legal and Compliance requested that evidence to say, I need to go through that. And if my memory serves me well, it was around October, November. I cannot recall clearly as to the specific date. She requested that file. I gave the file because I sealed that file, and I did not keep it within the premises. I kept it somewhere. I said, when she requested, I said, no, I'll bring it, the following day to you. I brought the file to her. It was in a brown envelope, and it was properly sealed with a sellotape, a clear sellotape. And the audio recordings were outside that file, that brown envelope, but they were in a smaller envelope, also sealed properly, placed on top of that documentary evidence. I gave those to her. She went and looked at that. I think she kept those documents for almost 2 weeks with her. Then later on, she called me to say, no, I'm done, you can come pick up those documents. And I went and picked that up from her. She gave it to me, that envelope, and I left. When I got to my office, instead of placing this, in a drawer whatsoever, I checked to say, okay, is everything still intact? I cannot say anything in relation to the document. I cannot confirm if there was any document taken out of that bundle or whatsoever, and I'm not implying that she did that. But the audio recordings were not there. They were missing.
All of it.
All of the audio recordings were not there. They were missing.
Had you kept copies?
No. No. I don't know what was with me. But I guess I was comfortable because I knew I could obtain copies from Ms. Tlatsana. So I went back to her and I said, ma'am, audio recordings are not part of this now. You did not give back. She said, no, I didn't. Oh, I thought they were there. And when you speak to a person, you look at them, the gestures, the responses. If there's something, suspicious to say, they know that they did not give this. I said, no, okay, I'll look at my house. Just like that. I said, okay, no, fine. And later on in the week, she came back to say, no, Tim, I could not find those recordings. So I had to go back to Ms. Tlatsana, to request the copy of the recordings. And she personally brought those recordings to our premises. She stood at the visitors' parking and she called me. I went. She gave me more than what she gave me initially, because of the way other conversation with other individuals on that. That's how I actually obtained those recordings again.
Well, that's when you found the recording of the conversation when you, the CEO, and...
No. Those are separate.
Not that one. Oh,
in actual
okay.
fact, the recordings that were added, it was between the HOD, Mr. Bailey Mashakoreng, and Ms. Tlatsana, of which on the initial recordings, that was not part of it. And
Okay.
some other recordings, yes.
Okay. But you got all the ones that you had lost.
Yes, all of
And
them.
then you got more and
Yes.
more. Yeah.
More and more, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Ms. Ngwenya, then at page 16, paragraph 47, you talk about the next two companies in this progression of successive companies who are contracted to provide ground handling services. They are referred to in paragraph 47 as MAMCO and PAMCO. I'd just for the record like to get those full names. So
I wonder, Ms. Hofmeyer,
Yes.
whether before you get into that section, whether it wouldn't be useful to kind of sum up what was wrong with Ms. Tlatlat's business. Did they provide the service but were paid more than they were supposed to be paid, or were they being paid what they were entitled to, but she was required to give money to other people? But if not now, then maybe later on. I thought it might be convenient before you move into another section, just to have a picture of what it is that was wrong.
Ms. Ngwenya, your investigation in relation to the Coroneka agreement, what did you establish in relation to the services that were being provided by Coroneka at Mafeking and Pilanesberg? Did you establish that they were providing ground handling?
I did.
And did you establish that they continued to provide those at the time that you met with her in June 2016?
Correct.
And did you establish that despite Valotech being appointed to replace Coroneka in the Mafeking airport, they actually had never provided any services there?
That's correct.
Thank you. Then if we just move to get to the nub of the chair's question as I have it, and we'll do that in relation to the payments. But as I have it, there were a series of payments totaling 31 million that were received. We break them down into 4 invoices in the course of your evidence. But the sum total, as I understand your affidavit, is that what was reflected on the invoices for each of those payments were not services related to the contract at issue between Coroneka and South African Express. Is that a fair summary?
That's correct.
And were there ever invoices from Coroneka related or making reference to the actual terms of the agreement that had been concluded between Coroneka and South African Express?
Nope.
Chair, my suggestion is that we maybe go now to the Coroneka agreement, just so that we can look at some of its provisions.
Yes.
And then we'll come back to the successive parties.
That's fine.
Let's do that. And Mr. Nchanga, it's effectively through you that we're going to look at these clauses, because I'm not suggesting in asking you to go through them that either you were involved in concluding the contract, nor that you have a legal background at all. But it's useful for us to understand at least what on its terms the contract envisaged. So if we may...
She said Mr. Nchaga.
Oh, I do apologize, Mr. Ngwenya. I do apologize. All right, we'll find the first agreement, Chair, under tab 7 and commencing at page 52. Now, Mr. Nchanga.
Mr. Ngwenya.
Oh my goodness, I've done it again. You know, it's a clear sign that we're close to 4 o'clock. It's been a fairly long few days, so I do apologize. I'll make a note to myself not to make that error again, Mr. Ngwenya. Mr. Ngwenya,
Yes.
this agreement that we're looking at page 52, who is this agreement between?
It's the Department of Community Safety and Transport Management and South African Express Airways.
I'm going just for reference purposes to talk about this as the main agreement, if I may. It's the agreement that sets up the relationship, as I have it, between SA Express and the Northwest Government in relation to those 2 airports.
Correct.
Okay. If we then, I'm going to come back to it, but just to orientate ourselves, if we then go over to page 91, which is under tab 8, that is another agreement, and who is that between?
South African Express Airways and Coroneka Event Managers, Coroneka Trading and Projects.
So can I call this the Coroneka agreement? Because
Correct.
that's the one that South African Express then concludes with Coroneka.
Correct.
And with reference to your evidence earlier, that's why you have a tripartite or a triangular relationship here. There's a
Correct.
relationship between South African Express and the Northwest Government,
Correct.
reflected in the main agreement, and then an agreement between South African Express and Coroneka. Is that as you understand it?
Correct.
Thank you. What I'd then like to do is go through just a few provisions, Chair, of the main agreement, which commences at page 52, just so that we get a sense of what this was envisaged to cover. And for that purpose, I'd like to start at page 59. Chair, with respect, it's fairly critical that we do this because the evidence over the next few days is going to have to fit into the structure of these agreements. So it's useful just to go through them.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
If we start at page 59, and it's clause 2.1 there, what this main agreement between the Northwest Department of Transport and SA Express provides is that at clause 2.1, in response to the request for proposal for reintroduction of an air transport service between OR Tambo International Airport, Cape Town International Airport, Pilanesberg Airport, and Mafeking Airport, defined as the airports, issued by the Department of Community Safety and Transport Management, the airline SA Express responded to request for proposals for the supply of airline service, subject to a subsidy from the department, which request for proposal was duly accepted by the Department Executive Council. There are a number of parts there that we will pick up in later evidence, Chair, but at least what this agreement is recording is that there was a proposal, as I have it, there was a response from SA Express who would provide the airline service, and that was subject to a subsidy. If we then go over the page to page 60, we then at clause 4 get told what those airline services are. And at 4.1 it's recorded that SA Express and the department hereby agree that SA Express shall, with effect from the effective date, commence the airline service on the designated route that's been defined as routes between OR Tambo, Cape Town, and those two northwest airports for a period of 5 years calculated from the effective date. And then at 4.3, as a contribution towards the costs of SA Express in providing the airline service, the department shall grant to SA Express the subsidy as more fully described in clause 6 hereof, and on the terms and conditions as more fully set out in the agreement. So I'd like to suggest we next go to that clause 6. It's over the page at page 61. And clause 6.1 is an important clause, because what it reflects is that the department shall pay to SA Express the subsidy and the management company the operational costs of both airports annually in advance as stipulated in Annex A. Now we need to just look at a few clauses to unpack that. First of all, this is the first time we've heard about a management company in the course of this agreement. So we need to go to clause 15, which is on page 73, to find out who the management company or what the management company is as envisaged in the agreement. So if we go to clause 15 on page 73, 15.1 provides the department mandates SA Express to appoint a management company responsible for managing the operations at Pilanesberg and Mafeking airports. At 15.4, well, let's go 15.2 first. The department shall be liable for the payment of operational costs of the operations of the said management company. 15.3, the management company will be responsible for operational and other additional services as required and agreed with the department and airline. And 15.4, SA Express shall enter into a service level agreement with the management company in terms of which the performance of the management company will be monitored and evaluated. In 15.5, for the purposes of development and skills transfer, SA Express shall train the employees of the management company and to be able to perform the functions of the service level agreement referred to in the clause above. So, Chair, at this point in the structure of the agreement, just to summarize, as I read the clauses, we've got the department agreeing to pay SA Express a subsidy for flying the routes, and also to pay a management company that's going to be appointed by SA Express in relation to the operations at the airport. And there were also to be, over the page at 62, sorry, I've gone back to 61. So at 62, clause 7, I won't read the whole of the clause, but that's a clause about quarterly reports that had to be provided by SA Express to update it. And significantly, Chair, we should go to Annex A, and that is at page 88. Because, Chair, that is the subsidy structure that we had a reference to earlier in the subsidy clause. I see that this copy of that page is not all that good. I know that there's a better one in the file of Mr. Perry, who's coming tomorrow.
Yes, okay.
But I'm fairly familiar with these figures, so I'll do my best just to indicate.
I think what could be done in due course is to replace it with a clearer copy.
Indeed, we'll do
Even
that.
here.
Then it's in the file.
Yeah.
I'll make a note about that. But the upshot is that in terms of the subsidy structure, Chair, as we understand this table, you'll see a reference in the top line under the heading Northwest Concession that there's a Pilanesberg entry and then a few lines down a Mafeking entry. And then 2 or so lines down from that, you have total subsidy. That half of this table is what the Northwest government was going to be paying to SA Express. The second half of the table, you'll see on the left-hand side in the first column, there's a heading Management Company Subsidy. And so the amounts in the second half are the management company subsidies. These amounts, Chair, are in the millions. So what you see in the first year, if we move along the columns, is in year 1, the total subsidy that's going to be paid to SA Express in the first half is 58 million and a bit. And the amount that's going to be paid to the management company is 51 million, if you go down. In year 2, the subsidy to SA Express is 51 million and a bit. I'm just rounding off for the purposes of this discussion. And in year 2, to the management company is going to be 31 million paid. In year 3, 43 million to SA Express and 31 million to the management company. In year 4, 46 million to SA Express and 31 million to the management company. And in year 5, 38 million to SA Express and another 31 million to the management company. As I've totaled that up, it just exceeds about 400 million over the course of 5 years in relation to flying routes on SA Express's part, and then on the management company's part doing some ground handling. So that's the arrangement of the main agreement. If we then go over to the Coroneka agreement, Chair, what appears quite striking about this agreement is that it has a totally different structure for how Coroneka is going to deliver its services of ground handling and how it's going to be remunerated. And so I'd just like to highlight those 2 clauses. It talks in its introductory parts about the fact that it's a ground handling agreement, that Coroneka is contracted to provide those services at Pilanesberg and Mafeking. And then if we go to page 99, you'll see in clause 20, it says at 20.1, in consideration of the ground handling company providing the services, the carrier, which is a reference to SA Express, agrees to pay the handling company the charges set out in the relevant Annex B hereto, including any additional expenditure incurred for providing the services referred to in this agreement. And the charges set out in Annex B hereto are not inclusive of any of the following. And that is just an exclusion about charges that would be levied really by airport and customs and other authorities. But then the next important clause is clause 21, because this is talking about, well, how are they going to account? How is the handling company Coroneka going to account to SA Express? And to summarize, there's an invoicing system. Monthly there'll be invoices, and within 30 days there'll be payment. And the last important thing to go to then is Annex B, which commences at page 108.1. That lists all of the multitude of handling services that are going to have to be provided. And finally, at page 108.5, are all of the rates that are applicable to the provision of those.
Page 10?
108.5, Chair.
Oh, okay.
And Chair, you'll see under clause 1.2 there's a heading for the services set out above, the applicable rate shall be as follows. And then there are rates for ground handling turnaround costs, for ground handling labor. There's a subtotal, there's a bit of a management fee put in there, and there's a total of 116,443 Rand. If you then go down to the breakdown in relation to the management fees in the next paragraph, so now we're talking about management fees in particular, There's an annual total that can be accumulated for management fees. That's about the fourth column along. And what you'll see there, Chair, is that management fees in relation to the turnaround of aircraft, the total annual amount is approximately 425,000. And the total for the other services, which are customer service agents and general workers, is 846,000. Chair, what is striking, we will suggest in the course of the evidence, is the discrepancy between those figures. You've got figures in relation to a subsidy under the main agreement in the region of 400 million, and a portion of that, just under 200 million, that over the 5 years is envisaged to go to the management company. But then in the actual agreement that's concluded between Coroneca and SA Express, you've got much more modest rates.
Yes,
And-
it's
and
very strange.
It's very strange.
Because they both relate to the same services.
Indeed, indeed. That will be explored with the witnesses, Chair, but that at least gives us the framework for the agreement that was concluded. Main agreement, but a reference in it to the management company and an entitlement to those millions worth of subsidies, and then an agreement between SA Express and Coroneca. Mr. Ngwenya, as I have your evidence though, the sort of invoicing that the Coroneca agreement envisages, monthly, in these much more modest amounts, are not invoices you ever uncovered. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So if we may then move to the invoices that you did uncover, because they are in the millions, and there are 4 of them. And Chair, with your guidance, I'm not going to go to MAMCO and PAMCO. Let's conclude,
No, that's fine.
if it's convenient, the Coroneca position.
Yeah, that's fine.
So we will do that, picking it up at page 18, Mr. Ngwenya, of your affidavit, 1-8.
I see that you are making sure.
Indeed. I've got a note here.
You don't make
Chair,
a
I will not
mistake again.
make another mistake. I might even attach it to the to the microphone, so there's no chance.
Okay.
But
yes.
we are at page 18, Mr. Ngwenya, and paragraph 53 there, you start to tell us about the first payment. Mr. Ngwenya, you give us, as seems to be the style of your affidavit, an enormous amount of detail. My sense is that, Mr. Ngwenya, you're a very detailed person, and so you have set out in scrupulous detail the tracking of the invoice, and then who authorized it, and then how it was paid and when it was paid. We have that on record. I'd like to just highlight the important points of it. Paragraph 53.1 records that on the 4th of May 2015, Coroneca issued an invoice of 8.5 million to SA Express. And then will you tell us what description was used on that invoice?
It was the airport refurbishment and compliance maintenance and operational setup costs.
Now, if you jump down to paragraph 53.4 on that page, you make the point that the expense authorization which follows that invoice reflects the same description: airport refurbishment and compliance maintenance and operation setup costs. And then will you just tell us what you make of that description on the invoice?
Look, Chair, this description, had nothing to do with SA Express, sort of responsibility.
Nor the agreement between SA Express and Correct.
Yes, the agreement between SA Express and Coroneca, because of
Yeah.
none of the services mentioned there, SA
Included
Express
there.
requested, that Coroneca provide. But
Yeah.
these, they are related to the facility management agreement, where Coroneca was acting as the management company providing services to the Northwest Department of Transport, in managing the airports. This has absolutely nothing to do with SA Express.
So are you saying that these types of services that fit this description, they fell outside of the agreement between SA Express and Koreneka,
That's correct.
but they did fall within the agreement between Koreneka as a management company and the Northwest Department of Transport and Community Safety.
That's correct, Chair.
Okay, but SA Express was being invoiced for those services
Yes, Chair.
in terms of the invoice.
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Ngwenya, I do need to indicate this to you. In terms of the evidence that will come in due course, it is not clear, certainly to me, that that description even falls within the envisaged subsidies under the main agreement. On what basis do you say you are satisfied that it falls under the main agreement?
Airport refurbishment. Compliance maintenance.
I think maybe let me put the question this way. In saying that that description in the invoice falls within the services contemplated in the agreement between Koreneka and the Northwest Department of Transport, are you saying that because you did have a look at that agreement, or are you basing your view on something else?
Chair, this information is also contained on the audio recordings, where Mr. Brian van Wyk was actually, describing the type of service to Ms. Babadi Tlatsane. It's on record, where
Yes.
he mentioned to say they need to refurbish the airport, they need to put on the CCTV, the fire trucks and all that.
But
Yes, but
around,
that's
yes.
that's fine. That's one thing. But did you have a look at the agreement and saw that it does fit in, or you assumed that it does because of what you had?
I assumed,
Okay.
because I knew for the fact that it was not part of the agreement between SA Express and
indeed.
Okay,
And
all right.
Mr. Ngwenya, if I may suggest, your personal knowledge in relation to the agreement between SA Express and Koreneka and what you managed to uncover in the invoicing, etc., is particularly relevant for our purposes. We have also listened to some of those recordings, and indeed, we will play them in the course of the evidence. Mr. van Wyk is often on those recordings indicating the need for refurbishment and fire trucks. But Mr. Ngwenya, that's precisely part of our investigation, because it is not at all clear to us that those were in fact envisaged services under the main agreement at all. Right, so the first payment is 8.5 million. We're at page 18. And they are for this quoted airport refurbishment and compliance maintenance and operational setup costs. That 8.5 million is paid by SA Express to Koreneka, is that correct?
that is correct.
You have the date of that over the page at 19. It was paid on the 6th of May, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And what you can certainly say is that description of services is not covered by the SA Express Koreneka agreement, correct?
Correct.
The second payment you'll pick up at page 19. It was to the value of a further 8.5 million, and it was dated the 17th of August, at least the invoice was. Do you see that at 54.1?
Yes.
What description was given on that invoice?
Airport refurbishment and compliance maintenance and facility upgrade.
And I then expect your evidence will be the same, that that was not covered by the SA Express Koreneka agreement.
That's correct.
And nonetheless, at 54.4, I pick up that the payment was made on the 27th of August, correct?
Correct.
In the amount of 8.5 million.
That's correct.
And generally, you gave this evidence earlier, but there is authorization for these payments being provided until this point by Mr. van Wyk. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right. And then we go to the third payment. Chair, what's interesting about the third payment from Mr. Ngwenya's evidence is that the payment was for 14 million. And it was a single payment on a single day. But the way it came into SA Express was in the form of two invoices for less each than 10 million. And Mr. Ngwenya has some views about why it was broken up into 2 invoices, but nonetheless paid in one payment. Mr. Ngwenya, you'll find that at page 20, paragraph 55. What is the point? Well, let's go first. The description on the first invoice, which was for 5.84 million, what was that?
Facility security management and facility management.
And the second invoice, what description was given for it?
Airport fire truck lease.
And that was for an amount of 8.16 million, is that correct?
That's correct.
And then at 55.2, you make the point about payments falling under 10 million rand. What is that point?
As I've explained earlier, ma'am, to say, there is a delegation of authority in terms of, signing off the money and all that. Now, on the expense auth, it is clearly depicted as to how much can the CEO and the GM sign off. Now, anything above 10 million, because I think he's got the signing power for 10 million rand. Now, at that time, it's 14 million that was supposed to be taken out of the account. Now, the CEO didn't have, the delegation of authority, in terms
Beyond
of the delegation of
10
authority to say he can sign for anything above the 10 million rand. In that regard, the board was supposed to be involved in this so as to approve and sign it off. But the amounts were broken into 2 smaller amounts which were below that 10 million threshold, so that, to circumvent the
need to approach the board.
They need to approach the board and the approval. And I must say that the board was never even informed of this transaction as the money was flowing out of the company. So the separation was just to ensure that it's below the 10 million threshold, and that obviously it enables Mr. Van Wyk the authority to sign it, off, and yeah.
So these payments, were they all authorized by the CEO, or is that something you're not sure about? You might know only one.
Okay, let me put it this way, Chair. On all these transactions, the CEO appended his signature on the
relevant documents to
expense authorization form.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Van Wyk was approving, so he endorsed, the CEO. He also signed on that, on all these expense.
All these transactions, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
He had knowledge because of earlier he informed me that this money was deposited to SA Express by mistake. It was not intended for SA Express, it was intended for Coronica. Hence, they were taking that money out of SA Express.
Okay.
Chair, just to pick up that point, if we just look at one of the expense authorizations, you'll see those signatures. We can go to the one under tab 13, page 123.
Tab 13.
Yes.
Chair, you'll see in the right-hand half of the page at the bottom, there's a place for recommended by and a signature and a name to be printed, and then approved by. Mr. Ngwenya, whose signature is on the approved by line there?
It's Mr. Brian Van Wyk's signature.
And then the name beneath that reads B.T. Van Wyk, is that right?
That's correct, Mr. Brian Van Wyk. It's Brian Tebogo Van Wyk.
And then is that signature under additional signature below there, the one that you identify as Mr. Nchanga's?
That's correct.
Thank you. And that's repeated throughout in relation to the expense authorizations, is that right?
Absolutely.
So those complete the 4 invoices but 3 payments. The first of 8.5, the second of 8.5, the third of 14, which total 31 million. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you were satisfied after your investigation that none of the descriptions on the invoices related to matters covered by the SA Express Coroneca agreement, correct?
That's correct.
And if we go back to page 20 of the affidavit.
So, I'm sorry. So, on the basis that the services that were reflected in the invoices for which Coroneca wanted to be paid fall outside of the services that were the subject of the agreement between SA Express and Coroneca, these payments were all not supposed to have happened.
That's correct, Chair.
Yes.
That's correct.
Okay.
At page 20 of the affidavit, Mr. Ngwenya, you talk about a discussion with Ms. Tlatsana that you reference at paragraph 55.3. And you state there that in my discussion with Ms. Tlatsana, she said that she did not know about these invoices and payments. Is that correct? Did you ask her about them?
That's correct. That's correct.
Thank you. And then
So she said she never prepared these invoices and her office never prepared them, or that she didn't prepare them.
She did not submit any invoice, and for that
Yes.
matter, Chair, she did not even know how to prepare an invoice
Oh,
at that juncture.
yeah. Is that
No.
something that's what she
told me.
you?
She told me.
Yeah.
At some stage, she asked me as to how to submit an invoice, how to go about.
was your understanding from her that that was the role that Mr. Kalisilira played?
Absolutely.
Is that what she
Absolutely.
conveyed to you?
Absolutely. And obviously, the recordings also, it is actually mentioned that Mr. David Kalisilira was responsible for the, preparing invoices and all that. And that came out of Mr. Brian van Wyck's, mouth. That was his exact words.
Mr. Ngwenya, you made the point a moment ago that you went to Mr. Nshanga to ask him about why SA Express was paying Coroneca in relation to matters, as you understood it, covered by the main agreement. Is that right?
That's correct.
And what was Mr. Nshanga's response to that?
His response was that the money was erroneously paid to SA Express when it was intended for Coroneca. So based on that, they had to pay it to Coroneca.
Because when we looked at that main agreement, you'll recall that clause says the department shall pay SA Express the subsidy and the management company. Is that where you draw the conclusion that it was for the department to pay the appointed management company, which in this case is Coroneca?
That's correct.
So you raise it with Mr. Nshanga, as I have your evidence, and he says, yes, it was erroneously paid to SA Express, and so SA Express had to pay it out to Coroneca. Is that right?
That's correct.
Thank you.
But I assume that suggests that the Department of Transport and Community Service or Safety in Northwest is the one that he was saying had paid the money to SA Express instead of Coroneca.
That's correct, Chair.
But if that was the case, they didn't pay it back to the person who erroneously paid it to them. For that person to pay it exactly where they were supposed to pay it, why were they the ones paying Coroneca?
That was my view, Chair, to say, in actual fact, it's unlawful to divert money that, is transferred to your account erroneously. It was not intended for Express, therefore why divert it instead of advising the Northwest Department, because if you've got a relationship to them, to say, reverse the payment and redirect it to the intended entity.
And it's not for you to to pass it on. You don't know whether Koronega is entitled to it or not. And if you pass it on to Koronega in circumstances where the Northwest Department of Transport says, no, but you shouldn't have done that, it's our money, what do you say?
That's exactly my point. That those are the issues that I raised with the CE chair.
Yes.
Because I was concerned about that.
Yes. I want us to take a break at 4:30. But if it's already a convenient time in terms of what you want to ask, we can take it now. Otherwise,
I was
in
just
5
going
minutes.
to direct you to one aspect, Chair.
No, that's fine. Let's
you-
go up to 2:30 if that's fine.
Excellent. Chair, it was just to reassure you at page 21 of Mr. Ngwenya's affidavit that he had exactly the same question as you had. As his paragraph 57 of the affidavit reads, he's recounted in the previous paragraph what Mr. Nchanga's response was, and he says in his affidavit, if I may, Mr. Ngwenya, I was disturbed by that response. The lingering question was, why didn't SA Express refund the money to the department if it was paid by mistake, but instead pay it to Koroneka? So, Mr. Ngwenya, it's fair to say that was precisely your concern, was it not?
Correct.
Indeed. Thank you, Chair. We can continue after the break.
Okay, let's take a 10 minutes break up to 25 to 5.
Thank you, Chair.
We adjourn.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
That's exactly split out. There's 5 to 10. Our contract with the department is for the first 5 years we hold your hand, and for the next 10 years we hold your hand.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you so much.
You're talking so fast. I don't know what she said. Good. No, I didn't go to the Derby. Not my mom. Definitely not the Derby.
Very later.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Ngwenya, I'd like to pick it up at the point where Valotech is now contracted to SA Express to replace Coroneka in relation to the Mafeking Airport. You've given us the background already to that in your testimony. As I have it in the course of your investigation, you tried to understand on what basis Valotech had been appointed. Is that correct? And Mr. Ngwenya, if you'll turn on the microphone. Thank you.
And before that, I'm sorry to interrupt you. In your investigation, did you ever try and establish whether there was any correspondence between SA Express and the Northwest Department of Transport relating to this erroneous payment, so-called erroneous payment to SA Express of money that was supposed to be paid to Coroneka?
I tried, Chair, but I did not get evidence to that effect.
But did you ask the CEO
I did.
if there was, and what did he say?
He said they were notified by the Northwest to say they erroneously deposited the money. But
And the notification was not in writing?
it appears so, because
Yes.
he did not provide
Okay.
any proof.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Ngwenya, as I have your evidence, Valotech is appointed, but the only record you could find of any process that was embarked upon before the contract was concluded related to labor broking services. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Chair, I propose we just look at, and Mr. Ngwenya, the Valotech agreement, and then we can be quite swift with the PAMCO and MAMCO agreements thereafter, because the point to be made is that they are replicas of the Coroneka agreement. You'll find the Valotech agreement under tab 19 at page 137.
Yes, yes.
So what you see here, Mr. Ngwenya, is an agreement. Just tell us who the parties are, if you may.
It's South African Express Airways and Valotech Facilities Management.
And Chair, I don't propose to spend time on it, but you can rest assured, and if anyone wants to take us up on this, they will. It is a replica. The one or two oddities, the annexure referred to in this agreement, we haven't been able to source. The one that sets out the ground handling services, this is the only version of the agreement that the Commission has been able to find. And then if you go over to tab 20.
Oh, that would be the cut and paste that Mr. Ngwenya was talking about.
Indeed.
Okay.
So you get the first Coroneka agreement, which is then replicated effectively in the Valotech agreement. And then you'll see, if you turn over to the next tab at page 159, Mr. Ngwenya, who are the parties to this agreement?
It's South African Express Airways and Housing, which is PAMCO.
Thank you. What I'm interested in, sorry, and let's just go to MAMCO to close it off, and then I want to ask you about when these two agreements were concluded. You'll find the MAMCO agreement as over the next tab at 21, starting at page 187. And who are the parties there?
It's South African Express Airways and Mahikeng Airport Management Company, MAMCO.
Thank you. Now, these two agreements, Mr. Nchanga, when were they concluded?
Mr. Ngwenya.
Oh my goodness, it's happened again. It's because I wasn't looking at my notes at the time.
I think he must charge you a fee now.
He must.
This time.
Clearly.
And if I do it again, please correct me.
And
Mr. Ngwenya.
Mr. Ngwenya, she's counsel, so you can
Indeed, there's
put
a-
your rate quite high.
Mr. Ngwenya, please tell the Chair when these two agreements, and Chair, we refer to them for short. The Mafeking Airport Management Company is MAMCO. The Halcyon trading as Pilanesberg Airport Management Company we refer to as PAMCO. And I suggest those will be our abbreviations for the next
Yes.
evidence session.
That's fine.
When were these two agreements concluded, Mr. Ngwenya?
We heard about this way after the departure of Mr. Njanga from SA Express, but they were concluded within his last 3 or 2 days before he exited SA Express, which
And-
is the 28th, 29 March 2017.
Right, so let's just place ourselves in time, if we may. You get the call from Ms. Tlatsana on the 24th of June 2016, correct?
Correct.
You move to investigate, you have your meeting on the Monday thereafter, you produce your report on the 6th of October 2016, is that correct?
That's correct.
You don't see action on it, but you give a final report later in that year, not signed, subject to the caveats that you've described.
Yes.
Then you have an interaction with Mr. Nchanga in early 2017, as I recall it, where he's asking you to write a letter to the Northwest government to reassure them about the relationship. And then when does he leave SA Express?
The following month,
When was
which
it?
is March 2017.
And was it at the end of the month?
It was definitely at the end of the month,
March 2017.
March 2017.
And these two agreements, as I have your evidence, are signed by Mr. Nchanga within 2 or so days of that departure.
That's correct.
They dated the 28th and the 29th of March 2017. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Mr. Ngwenya, I then...
I'm sorry,
Apologies.
it might be appropriate to just check, you may have dealt with this before. With regard to the Querinang, the...
Coroneka.
Coroneka, that company. Was Ms. Tlatlatsi the only owner, shareholder, director that was in it, or is that something you don't know?
According to the information and the document that she handed to me, prior to Mr. Van Wyk bringing the two partners, she
Yes.
was the sole owner of the company.
Yes.
And after Mr. Victor Tabing resigned and she had to take out Mrs. Joyce Peary out of the company, she remained alone again.
Oh, okay, all right.
So there's a period of time, Mr. Ngwenya, as I have it, where there were 3 members of the CC, herself, Mr. Tabeng, and Ms. Peary.
Yes.
But then Mr. Tabeng resigned, and then Ms. Peary, there was litigation over her removal. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And can I just ask about whether your investigation established any relationships between Ms. Peary, whom you've referred to and who was appointed into the company Coroneka, Mr. Peary, who was responsible for certain appointments within the company, and Mr. Van Wyk.
Yes, I did establish, ma'am.
And what are they?
Chair, Mrs. Peary is the mother to Mr. Levi Sipho Peary. And Mr. Levi Sipho Peary is a life partner of Mr. Brian Van Wyk. Boyfriend, yes.
But there is a personal relationship.
There's a personal relationship. They're in a, yes, romantic relationship.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Okay.
And
And I guess, Ms. Hofmeyer, you will also explore the issue of who were the owners, members, shareholders of Manco and Panco.
Indeed.
Yeah.
we have, I think from your evidence already, Mr. Ngwenya, that Ms. Dube moves from Coroneka, where she was appointed as the facilities manager by the Mr. Peary we've been speaking about, correct?
Correct.
She's then dismissed by Ms. Tlatsana, correct?
Correct.
That Ms. Tlatsana relays to you is the reason for the conflict emerging between her and Mr. Van Wyk, correct?
Correct.
And then Valotech is given the agreement, the same agreement that was concluded with Coroneka, And does Ms. Dube feature there again?
Ms. Dube featured there as the owner of 50% shareholding. And
Of Valotech.
of Valotech. And
Yeah.
Chair, just to mention, for the purpose of this hearing, the other owner of Valotech, Ms. Kifilwe Mogodiri, is also related to Mrs. Piri because of Mrs. Piri's maiden name is Mogodiri as well. So I guess Mr. Van Wyk wanted to keep it in the family.
But when you say they are related, is that because that's, you know that to be a fact, or you just saw the names that
It was confirmed, I was
it was
told that,
confirmed? Oh,
yes.
okay.
So there's another personal link, as I have it, within Valotech's ownership. Ms. Dube, appointed initially in Coroneka by Mr. Piri and then appears again in Valotech, correct?
Correct.
And then her co-partner in that business, Ms. Mogodiri, is related to Mr. Piri and Ms. Piri. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That, just for the record, is at page 22, paragraph 59 of your affidavit. And in terms of the ownership of PAMCO and MAMCO, were you able to establish any links there, Mr. Ngwenya?
Honestly speaking, I did not actually investigate that because of I had actually concluded, and it happened where, we discovered after Mr. Njanga left. But what I've established in the ownership of PAMCO was that Ms. Notando Dube was also a owner of PAMCO.
And let me just get one other point of clarity. Valotech was never paid by SA Express, was it?
That is correct.
It was paid directly by the Northwest Department of Transport, is that correct?
Absolutely.
And do you know what the payment position is in relation to MAMCO and PAMCO?
Not really, ma'am. As I've said, that I did not.
We'll
actually
traverse that in
investigate
other
this.
evidence. So, Mr. Ngwenya, if we may then go, subject to any other queries, Chair, that you may have in relation to the agreements, I'd like to take us to page 25 of your affidavit.
Page 25.
And before we begin with the last paragraph on that page, I would just like your confirmation. You indicated a moment ago you didn't investigate PAMCO and MAMCO extensively,
Sure.
But I do recall from your affidavit that you were able to establish that no procurement process had been followed in relation to their appointment at the end of March 2017. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and that's as SA Express's procurement is concerned, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, we now have a section of your affidavit, Mr. Ngwenya, that is headed the Latuli House ambush and the 3 million rand bribe. Mr. Ngwenya, I'd like to go through that. Can you tell us what happened on or about the 18th of August 2016? I know that in the course of the remaining pages of your affidavit, you go into a great deal of detail about the steps you took to identify the people who you were dealing with. Feel free to explore that. But in essence, tell us what happened on the 18th of August 2017. 2016.
2016.
Apologies.
At that time, I was still running with this investigation. I had not yet concluded or
Just raise your voice again. I know it's been a long day, but just try and raise your voice. Yeah.
Okay, Chair. I'm saying at that time, I was still, running with the investigation and all that. And on that particular day, I received a call.
That is 18 August 2016.
Yes. And I hope my memory serves me well on the day. But anyway, I've indicated to say the itemized billing can be, retrieved to actually
Check the date
Yes,
if
yes.
you are mistaken.
On that day, Chair, I received a call. Now, I've got the caller ID on my phone. So even if I don't have your number. For as long as it's recorded, it will reflect as to who you are. Now, on that particular day, I received a call from my counterpart at AXA, which is the head of security, Mr. Jason Shabalala, who happened to be the former bodyguard of the late President, Mr. Nelson Mandela. He gave me a call, and at that time when he called, in that period, I was dealing with quite a number of investigations, and we had suspended a lady who was working for SA Express, and during that time, the lady alleged that Mr. Shabalala was actually the cousin. In actual fact, she tried to influence me to turn a blind eye on that particular investigation. She went on to mention that I mustn't worry with the footage if it's available. Mr. Jason Shabalala was the cousin, and he could assist, to erase the movement and all that.
Okay,
So when I received this call,
you were too fast. I think I've missed something.
Okay.
Please go back
back.
a little bit.
I'm
On
saying-
that day, you received a call and you could tell who it was who was phoning you.
Yes.
Yeah, just take it from there.
now my thinking, when I saw that it was Mr. Jason Shabalala that was calling, in my mind, I thought he was to ask me about the lady, Miss Zuzega Lokwe, who was suspended at the time. I thought he was going to ask me about her, talk about her, because before we suspended her, there was a matter that I was investigating. And, she mentioned that Mr. Jason Shabalala, because of that part, spoke to her movement, to the airport and all that. And I indicated to say there's a footage movement and all that. So she persuaded me to turn a blind eye, and she then mentioned to me that Mr. Jason Shabalala at AXA, the head of security, was her cousin. So, according to her, Mr. Shabalala was going to make the footage disappear. That was according to her. Now, when I received the call, and
This was a footage covering what?
no, it's something else.
Something else,
Hence, I'm
okay.
saying it's,
All
it's-
right,
it's another
okay.
thing.
We
So it
don't
was
need
my
to
fault.
go into it, but
Yes.
it's footage that you were interested in looking at or not really? Or maybe you don't need to.
It was a
Okay,
separate case.
Okay,
It wasn't this.
separate thing, yeah.
I'm just trying to relate the story
Yes, okay.
of my thinking.
All right.
So I thought he was to talk about that because of what she told me. But that was not the case. Mr. Shabalala, in fact, said to me, he greeted me nicely. Tim, how are you? I said, no, I'm okay. And he said to me, hey, there's a guy that wants to talk to you, Chief. I said, talk to me about what? He said, no, man, he just wants to talk to you. I said, who is this person? He said, no, he's a brother, man. I mean, you can, chat to the guy.
And you knew Mr. Shabalala before?
I knew
that
Mr.
time?
Shabalala, but
Okay.
we're not close. We're in the
Yeah.
very same space.
Okay.
And the last time I spoke to him, it was, way back, approximately 2013, 14, when I was still working for my previous company.
Okay.
Yes. It was then about a certain investigation anyway. So it's not a person that we. Now, when he called me, that also I was like, oh, Jason calling me. Where did he get my number and all that? So he told me, no, this person is a brother, man. And casually so, And honestly speaking, he was nice. He's a nice guy. He wants to talk to you. I said, okay. But who's this guy? He said, no, don't worry, he's a brother. He wants just to talk to you. I said, okay, fine. Not a problem. You can give him my number. But I got worried somehow to say, he did not speak about what I thought he would raise. What's going on here? Could it be about this Northwest issue? Well, I didn't know at the time. Approximately 30 minutes or so later, I received a call from an unknown person. And this person indicated to me that I got your number from Mr. Jason Shabalala. I would like to meet you around the Midrand area this afternoon. In actual fact, when I knock off, from work, around 5.
But from your phone, you could tell who the caller was?
No, I couldn't. I couldn't
Oh.
tell. I couldn't. It showed the number. It didn't show the name.
Okay.
Yes, it showed the number. It didn't show the name. And I said to this person, Chief, I don't know you in the first place. and you want to meet with me in Midrand, you don't even greet me. I felt that he was rude, actually, you know. You're telling me that you got my number from somebody, and the next thing you want to meet with me. I don't know you and all that. He said to me, no, I need to talk to you, Chief. I've got a mandate. I need to talk to you. I said, Chief, what mandate are you talking about? He said, no, I've got a mandate from Luthuli House. I just want to talk to you. Can we meet? I said, I can't meet you in Midrand. I can meet you in the airport precinct or in the East Rand Mall towards my way home, because I'm a Far East Rand boy. I stay in the Far East Rand. Therefore, I cannot be driving to Midrand and all that. And you want to talk to me. Therefore, you have to sort of come to me. He said, okay, fine. No, it's fine. I can meet you. I said, where can we meet? He said, no, I'll let you know. I'm in Cape Town right now, but as soon as I get to the airport, I would tell you exactly where we can meet.
Mr. Ngwenya,
Yes.
if I may just interject there, at page 26, paragraph 73, you record in your affidavit that you said something else to this caller when he said to you that he had been given a mandate from Luthuli House
Yes.
to come and speak to you. What you record there is you say, I told him that I'm not a politician
Yes.
and cannot be talking about Luthuli House mandates. Is that correct?
That is correct, ma'am. That is correct.
Thank you. Please continue. So you said that. You then had a discussion with him about where you could meet, as I have your testimony.
Yes.
And he said he's going to get onto a plane and come into Johannesburg, and so you could meet at the airport. Is
Absolutely.
that correct?
That is correct, ma'am. That's exactly what I said, and that's what he told me.
And then if we, on page 27,
Yes.
you then pick up that point about the indication that he gave you that he was going to be flying up from Cape Town. You'll see that at paragraph 75, because there you say, in a space of about an hour and 30 minutes, the caller called me again and said he was in Johannesburg and asked if we could meet. Do you attach any significance to that period of time?
That is correct, ma'am. There's no way that you can fly from Cape Town to Johannesburg and be outside the terminal building within a period of 1 hour, 30 minutes. It's impossible.
But nonetheless, he
So-
was calling you from the terminal building, correct?
He was actually, absolutely, he was at the terminal building. And the story that he was in Cape Town, clearly it's not true. There's no way. There's no way. I think that's the part that actually exposed him to me, that he was not really telling the truth. Because I'm working in that space. I know the duration and all that of the flights and all that.
But
So it
you
wasn't
did then agree to meet him in the Intercontinental Hotel foyer, is that right?
Absolutely. That's where he told me that he'll be waiting for me.
And then as I have your affidavit, you went to meet him. On your way, however, you told Ms. Moshwele that you were going to meet a person who'd called you. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct.
And then tell us what happened when you went to the Intercontinental.
Well, as I went to the Intercontinental, at that juncture, I must say, I was a bit worried. And, I thought that, I need to play smart and safe, in approaching this whole thing. So I moved from the Airways Park towards the airport, but there's an entrance to the air side where workers, only workers, are actually entering the air side. I went through that air side, just to be safe, to walk within the air side, towards the Intercontinental. Obviously, I would get on to the terminal building and go out through the terminal building. But while I was walking there, because he had already given me the description and the location, I phoned my associate. I'm in the security sector, so I phoned my associate to say, guys, I've got a situation. I need to cover for me, because in this regard, I think this may be an ambush of some sort. I really don't trust. Can you kindly establish as to whether this person is there, and And the guys, as I was walking, it took me some time. As I was walking, they went and checked and they called me as I got onto the terminal building or approaching the terminal building. They informed me to say, you know what, yes, the person is sitting there, the foyer, but there were two guys who were standing, you know, right next to him, just a few meters away from him, and it appears that they are, you know, together with this guy. So be wary of that. Now, as I came, and obviously they were watching because of I wasn't really. I felt that, you know, I cannot really compromise my safety just like that. So as I came in, I found the guy while I was inside the terminal building, but I could see him through the glass to say, hey, Chief, I'm here, where are you? And I could see when he picked up the phone. And when I look on the side, I saw the two guys, then I went through. But I was wearing, you know, a coat with that cap, you know, trying to disguise in a way, you know, so that if, for walking from the Airways Park towards the Charlie Gate, if there's someone perhaps who's waiting for me there to do something, they may not be able to sort of recognize me. So I went to him and he was sitting there. I greeted him. He greeted me and back, and he said, I think his name, if I'm correct, I think he was Sipo. He mentioned, I think, the surname, but I cannot just recall the surname. Then we said, and he said to me, Chief, I'm from Luthuli House, and I've been given a mandate to talk to you pertaining your investigation in the Northwest. And I said to him, Luthuli House, what do I have to do with the mandates from Luthuli House? Because if I'm not a politician, I'm not interested in politics. He said, no, it's about this investigation that you're conducting. Listen, Chief, the money that is siphoned out of, you know, the Express, the money that is in question here.
I'm sorry, and this was in August 2016.
That is in August 2016.
And Mr. Van Wyk had disappeared on the 1st of July 2016.
Yes.
Okay. Your investigation was still ongoing.
Yes.
Okay.
This is the person that I did not know. I did not meet this person, you know, even previously. So he said to me he was given this mandate because of the money that was involved, the money that was taken out, you know, siphoned from this, was meant to finance the political activities of the ANC. I said, Chief, that has absolutely nothing to do with me. My concern here is Mr. Brian Van Wyk, who manipulated the system and transgressed. My focus is on everything that happened within SA Express. As to who else is involved out of SA Express, that has absolutely nothing to do with me, and I don't want to know anything about it. He said, Chief, come on. We need you to drop this. Do you know how Mr. Brian Van Wyk got this surname? I said,
and I'm sorry, when you said the money that was taken out, did you which money was he talking about and being taken out from where?
The money that was in question, it's all about the 31 million rands
Yes.
here.
Yes.
Now he's saying I must drop the investigation.
Oh, he was saying you must drop
I must drop the
investigation.
investigation.
Oh, okay.
Because the money involved was to fund the political activities of the ANC. And I said, I'm not a politician. I have nothing to do with that. And as far as this whole thing is concerned, Mr. Brian Van Wyk manipulated the system and he transgressed. My concern was Mr. Brian Van Wyk because of, you know, he was working for SA Express, and anything out of SA Express was actually none of my business. And I was not interested because I'm not a politician. I don't even intend to become one.
Ms.
So-
Ngwenya, can I just clarify? You indicated in your testimony a moment ago that he was referring to the money siphoned out of the Northwest.
Yes.
Is that right? Is that the word he used?
Come again, ma'am?
Is that the word he used?
Absolutely, ma'am. Absolutely.
And
To
what-
say, to be precise, he said the money that was moved out of Northwest.
And then he went on to say was to be used to fund the ANC's political campaign.
Campaigns, exactly, yes.
Thank you.
Yes, no, just before we leave that point, there is significance in the question Ms. Hofmeyer was putting to you, whether the word that this person used was siphoned out, money was siphoned out. And you initially said yes, but then he said money that was moved.
Yes.
Now I want you to indicate whether you are using, when you say it was moved, you are using a word that this person used, or you are using your own word to describe what he said to you.
Okay, siphoned, it's my own word.
Okay.
Siphoned is my own word.
You are expressing
the-
it the way you understood it.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, no, that's
yes.
fine.
The money that was moved from the Northwest, yes, yes.
But Mr. Ngwenya, did you have any doubt in the course of this conversation that you were talking about that 31 million?
No, I didn't have any doubt, ma'am, for a simple reason that he spoke about Mr. Van Wyk, and Mr. Van Wyk was involved in the 31 million.
And then you
I'm sorry. It's quite an important part. So just go back to the conversation that you greet, you find him there, you greet, and what does he say to you?
He had a mandate from Luthuli House to talk to me pertaining the investigation that I'm running against Mr. Brian Van Wyk, which involved the money that was moved from the Northwest, and that money was used to finance the ANC political campaigns, you know, those activities. So in a way, he was saying, this was not Mr. Brian Van Wyk money. It was actually the ANC's money.
I know that it's been, 3 years or 4 years since then. I just want to understand the toing and froing of the conversation between the two of you,
Yes.
if possible, but it might not be possible. He says this money, this investigation that you are involved in, that you are conducting concerning Mr. Van Wyk,
Yes.
concerns money that was moved from the Northwest government, which
Yes.
was meant for funding ANC activities.
Yes.
And does it say you must drop the investigation, or what happened? I just want to follow how the conversation between the two
Yes,
of you
yes,
continues.
Chair. I was about to get to that part as well. The intention of talking to me at that juncture, he said this money was to fund that. And then he said Mr. Brian Van Wyk, in actual fact, was actually, that's my interpretation. He was the vehicle to get the money out and channel it towards those activities of the ANC. Because of, he even went on to say, you know how he obtained this surname Van Wyk? Because of he's very dark, you know. And I said, I don't want to know. He then said to me, we can offer you 3 million rands to drop this investigation. My response to him was that SA Express was paying me adequately. Therefore, I need not take any money from anyone. He tried to persuade me, and I told him straight that I wasn't really interested. Now, he moved from that subject to talk about the 20 million rands that was still, you know, in the Koroneka account. And at that time, Mr. Kalisilira and Mr. Brian Van Wyk, they had no access to that money because Ms. Tlatsana moved that money to another account because of when the conflict started between them. Later on, there was a deposit of 20 million from the Northwest. So she moved that money so they could not have access, preventing them to that access.
Mr.
So at
Ngwenya,
that time-
could I just stop you there if I may? Because it's a part that comes up in the recordings,
Okay.
but it's not an aspect that you've traversed in your evidence yet. So could we
Okay.
just get it clear? You have, by this stage, you're in August 2016.
Yes.
You have been able to account for the 31 million.
Yes.
Because you've gone back to the records of SA Express.
Absolutely.
And you've seen that total amount being paid out of SA Express pursuant to 4 invoices and 3 payments. Is that correct?
Absolutely, absolutely.
But, Chair, you'll recall when we were looking at that subsidy page under the main agreement, the first total annual amount that Coroneca was supposed to receive, or the management company to be appointed, was a total of 51 million. So at this point, you've accounted for 31 million of it, which was paid out of SA Express, but there's a remaining 20 million.
Yes.
But as I understand the recordings and what Ms. Tlatsana told you, that 20 million came then in a payment directly from the Northwest to Coroneca, correct?
That is correct, ma'am. That is correct.
And as I recall that recording, which we'll listen to, that occurred in the Spur restaurant, part of the conversation between Ms. Tlatsana and Mr. Van Wyk is about that 20 million.
Absolutely.
Which Ms. Tlatsana was not giving Mr. Van Wyk access to. Is that correct?
That is correct, ma'am.
So, Chair, that's an important background because now we move to a point in this conversation, as I have it, with this person you've been called to meet with, where he moves from offering you 3 million rand to drop the investigation to this 20 million.
Yes.
And what does he say about that?
He said on the 20 million rand that there's a 20 million rand, of course, that was within the Coroneca contract, and it was clear that they didn't have access to it. He said to me, he understands that I've got a better understanding with Ms. Tlatsana, so I needed to persuade him to let go of the money, release the money, or he must move out of the airport, you know, to leave that space. And my response to him was that I have nothing to do. I'm not part of Coroneca, and I cannot entertain such. I don't have even the mandate to deal with such. I blatantly refused, you know, to entertain those issues. So he said to me, I mean, think about it, Chief. You know, the 3 million rand. I said, listen, Chief, I do my job without fear, favor, or prejudice. And my mandate has nothing to do with the political dealings and getting involved in other companies' affairs. So I'm not interested. He said, you must think about it. I said to him, even if I can think about it, the answer would remain the same, no. And we ended up parting ways. He left and I left. I hope
For the duration of your discussion with him,
yes.
were the 2 other people that before you came to talk to him had seemed to be with him, were they with him, or were they in the vicinity, or were they no longer there?
You know, Chair, to be quite honest with you, as I arrived, they were there. But at the time when we were talking, I had actually forgotten about them. My mind shifted. I did not think about them.
And you don't know
anymore.
whether when you
Yes.
finished they were there
I
or
did not think about them, but
Yes.
yes.
Okay.
Mr. Ngwenya, you are now, as I have your evidence at page 29 of your affidavit, I've been following what was contained there as you've been giving your testimony. Where I'd like to ask you to pick it up, and really in conclusion of your evidence, is paragraph 80.
Okay.
Because at paragraph 80, you talk about the steps you took in the following week and what the reactions were of Ms. Moshwele and Mr. Nchanga to what you told them. Can you take us through that, please?
Yes. On that week, it was around the 23rd or 25th, you know, of August, and I was with Ms. Moshwele and Mr. Nchanga. It was in his office, actually, where I think Mr. Nchanga actually asked us to, how did my meeting and the guy that I met from the Luthuli House went, because of Ms. Moshwele
Yes.
informed him that I was meeting some guys and all that, because of I did not talk to him about, you know, me meeting the guy. So I informed Ms. Mochwili. So Mrs. Mochwili told him that I met the guy. So he was asking as to how it went, and I narrated the story as to what transpired, what was the guy, what exactly did he want from me and all that. And I indicated that, the connection between me and the guy was created by Mr. Jason Shabalala, who's the head of security at AXA. And Mr. Njanga's reaction was that, Jason Shabalala, who's this Jason Shabalala? And I explained to him that he's the head of security at AXA. I said, I don't know the guy. Oh, you don't know the guy? Yeah, I don't know the guy. Who's that? And, while I was trying to explain, we ended up talking about the movie Invictus. The Invictus, the rugby and Madiba in that movie, where Mr. Jason Shabalala and Mr. Linga Munsame from SA Express as the bodyguard of the president. They were played by Tony Khoroge and Patrick Mufokeng. So we spoke about that, where he pretended as if he didn't know, but little did he know that I was aware that they were quite close, because I've seen them before, within together within the airport precinct. So he pretended as if he didn't know, but later on he made a mistake by saying, hey, Jason, anyway, he lost his father, and I could not attend the funeral because I had the engagements. And so that nullified everything that he said before, that he didn't know this guy, pretending as if he didn't know him. So it was all about that. But to a certain extent, it gave a different picture to me, about him.
Chair, those are the questions from our side.
Yes, thank you. Would there have been cameras to capture you and this man talking about the 3 million rand bribe that would have been there?
I'm not sure, Chair, but there's plenty of cameras around that space. So whether that area is covered, I'm not really sure. But also, it's not going to be possible to retrieve those records because of the
time lapse.
The timeline, yes.
What's the time lapse? What's the time within which one has got to get them before they lapse?
Well, it all depends.
Before they become unavailable.
It all depends, and in most cases, the footage that if we request. Yes. Yes, and
we are 2.5 years or so from August 2016, isn't it?
Come again, sir.
We are 2.5 years or so
yes.
away from the date when this incident occurred in August 2016. Isn't that within time?
No, you can only retrieve 30 days back.
Is that so?
Dating back to 30 days.
And you are sure about that?
And some of the, yes, because of I view
Yeah.
the footage, I've got plenty
Yeah.
investigation that I conduct that where we also retrieve the footage
Yes.
movement and all that. So I'm certain 100%.
Yes. I'm wondering why you might not have considered it necessary soon after that encounter with this man to try and at least get his picture, because this was somebody who was who sought to bribe you.
Chair, I did not think of it. However, when I received the call, before I went and met the guy, because of 30 minutes after I was called by Mr. Shabalala, 30 minutes later, I received the call from this guy, and he told me that he'll tell me about his location at the airport. I started to think as to who might have, gave Mr. Shabalala my contact. And the person that I thought about at the time was Mr. Linga Munsami, who's the head of security at SAA. And we're very close. And I figured out that they were both the bodyguard of the late President, Mr. Mandela. Therefore, I decided to go straight to Mr. Linga Munsami to ask if he had given Mr. Shabalala my contact. And he agreed, he confirmed to say, yeah, no, he called me and he requested your contact. I gave the contact to him. I said to him, there's a problem. This is the situation. There's a guy that called me, and because of Jason, created, the platform for the guy to have access to me. And you gave the number. He said, what is this all about? I said, no, I don't know. But there's a matter that I'm busy with, which I think to a certain extent you might have a bit of a knowledge. And he was really concerned to say, you know what, I gave the number to Jason because I thought we are in the very same security, what's the word that I want to use?
You're both in the security sector.
Sector, absolutely, yes. That we all in the security sector.
So Mr. Jason Shabalala would know the identity of this person that you met
Absolutely.
because he's the one who arranged for the two of you to meet.
Absolutely, sir.
Yes, but did you ever ask him what's the name of that person you wanted me to meet? Did you ever ask Mr. Shabalala?
At the time when I asked him, he did not disclose the guy's name. He said it's a brother that wants to talk to you.
Yes.
He didn't even say as to what was the subject.
Yes,
that we
but
had to
that was at the time before you met the guy.
Yes.
I mean, after you had
I-
met the guy, did you go back to him to say,
To date, I haven't spoken to him.
I would have thought that you would want to talk to somebody who sent somebody who sought to bribe you.
I did not talk to him to
Yes.
date. Sometimes we meet in these workshops,
Yes.
the civil aviation, but we
Yes,
don't.
but he's the one who
We-
gave
we're
you.
not close.
Yeah.
He's the one.
And the number that he used to call you, would it still be available somehow?
I suppose so, sir, because I didn't have his number, Chair, at that
Yeah.
particular juncture. However, I went back to sort his contact, which I think is the very same number that he used, and I gave to the Commission's investigation for the purpose of retrieving the itemized billing
Okay.
to reflect the connection between the guy, myself, and him.
Okay, well, that's fine. Thank you very much for having come to give evidence in the commission. We have had over the past 2 days or so, or 3 days, I'm not sure, no, 2 days.
2 days.
2 days. 3 people, 2 of whom are past officials of a parastatal who have given evidence about what happened at SAA and so on. And today you have also given evidence about things that happened at SA Express, and you dealt with investigations that relate to taxpayers' money being diverted away from where it should go. So thank you very much. You may be asked to come back in the future, and I've no doubt you will come back if you are asked. But thank you very much for coming to share your evidence with the Commission.
Thank you, Chair.
And you are excused.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
We are done.
We are done. I understand we have an early start tomorrow.
Yes, tomorrow we are going to start at 8 o'clock and we'll go up to 11 o'clock because for the rest of the day I will not be available. So we're starting early to try and make use of whatever time is available. And then on Friday, we will start at some stage later than usual. But I'll indicate maybe tomorrow what time we'll be looking at. We'll adjourn then for today, and then tomorrow we'll start at 8. We adjourn.